My name is Victoria, and I am 32 years old. My best friend looked across our table at a Manhattan steakhouse and told me I did not fit the aesthetic of her bridal party. She cut me from her wedding, claiming my tailored business suits ruined her old money vision. 2 weeks before her date, her dream venue abruptly canceled her contract. She called me weeping, begging for help, having no idea I owned the only other available estate in the city. And she certainly had no idea I was about to use her wedding to expose her fiancé for running a multi-million-dollar Ponzi scheme. Before I explain how I legally dismantled their fraudulent empire, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like and subscribe button if you enjoy seeing arrogant people handed a dose of undeniable justice. The air inside the private dining room smelled of seared, dry-aged beef and expensive Cabernet. Chloe sat across from me, pushing her half-empty mimosa toward the center of the white linen tablecloth. We had been friends for 10 years, but the woman sitting opposite me was practically a stranger. She wore a pristine tweed blazer and pearl earrings, playing a role she had curated over the past year. Next to her sat Julian, her fiancé. Julian managed a cryptocurrency hedge fund and never missed an opportunity to remind everyone in the room about his portfolio. He checked his oversized gold watch, swirling his scotch with a look of practiced boredom. Chloe cleared her throat, folding her hands neatly. "Victoria." She began, her voice coated in a layer of artificial sweetness. "I have been finalizing the visual direction for the ceremony. I want a very specific heritage aesthetic for the bridal party. Vintage lace soft pastels, a timeless country club feel." She paused, letting her eyes drag over my charcoal gray trousers and structured blazer. "You are always so severe, Victoria. You live in boardrooms and construction sites. Your energy just clashes with the vision I want for the photographs. I think it is best if you step down as a bridesmaid and just attend as a regular guest." Julian let out a short, amused scoff. He leaned back in his leather chair, resting his arm behind Chloe. "Do not take it personally, Vic," he chimed in, using a nickname I despised. "The bridal party needs to look cohesive. You stick out. Just enjoy the open bar and let Chloe have her perfect day." I did not offer them the satisfaction of a reaction. I did not shed a tear or argue about our 10-year history. As a commercial real estate developer, I spend my days negotiating with zoning commissioners and hostile contractors. A petty social demotion from a woman drowning in her own vanity was not going to break my composure. I simply offered a polite nod. "I understand, Chloe. I hope the photos turn out exactly the way you want." Julian smirked, viewing my calm demeanor as surrender. He signaled the waiter to bring the check, eager to conclude the uncomfortable meeting. When the leather billfold arrived, he pulled out his phone to open his banking application to verify his account balance before handing over a heavy platinum card. He placed his phone face up on the table for a fraction of a second too long. My eyes naturally gravitated toward the glowing screen. A push notification from a secure clearinghouse was actively displaying a recent wire transfer confirmation. The text showed an incoming deposit of $85,000. My breath caught in my throat. I did not care about the amount. I cared about the institutional routing number listed directly below the transaction. My development firm manages several commercial trusts, and we interface frequently with regional pension funds. I recognized that specific 9-digit prefix instantly. It belonged to the exact internal retirement portfolio managed for Chloe grandparents. I kept my expression perfectly serene, picking up my water glass for a slow sip. The pieces of the puzzle aligned with terrifying speed. Julian was not generating revenue from his cryptocurrency fund. He was quietly draining the life savings of 2 elderly people to finance a lavish wedding and project an illusion of wealth. The argument over my aesthetic was a convenient smokescreen. They wanted me out of the inner circle because having a financial expert standing too close to a house of cards is a dangerous liability. I watched Julian sign the receipt and slide his phone back into his pocket. He thought he had just put me in my place. He had no idea he had just handed me the keys to his prison cell. I walked out of the restaurant and into the crisp Manhattan air. The valet brought my vehicle around. I handed him a tip, slipped into the driver's seat, and engaged the locks. The heavy doors sealed, shutting out the noise of the city. I sat in the quiet cabin for a long moment, resting my hands on the steering wheel. A decade of shared birthdays, late-night phone calls, and holiday dinners had just been casually discarded over a color palette. Another woman might have pounded the steering wheel or shed tears over the betrayal. I simply felt a chilling clarity wash over my mind. I reached into the passenger seat and unzipped my leather briefcase. I pulled out my encrypted work laptop, resting it on the center console. As a commercial real estate developer managing highly regulated corporate trusts, I utilize software designed to track complex financial ecosystems. My firm regularly interfaces with the exact regional pension network Julian was currently siphoning. I booted the system and logged into the compliance portal, bypassing the standard user interface to access the raw institutional transaction logs. I typed the routing number I had memorized from his phone screen just minutes earlier. The data materialized on my screen in stark rows and columns. I did not focus on the emotional reality of my friend being married to a thief. I looked at the numbers with the clinical detachment of a surgeon examining a fatal wound. Julian marketed his firm as an elite cryptocurrency hedge fund, utilizing proprietary trading algorithms to guarantee exorbitant returns. The spreadsheets told a vastly different story. There was no algorithm. There was no market trading occurring within these accounts. I traced the deposits flowing into his primary holding company. The capital was coming from elderly investors, small business owners, and vulnerable retirees who had bought into his charismatic pitch. But the money never reached any investment exchange. Instead, Julian was shuffling the incoming cash directly into secondary payout accounts. He was using the fresh deposits from new clients to pay fake dividends to his older investors, maintaining the illusion of explosive growth. It was a textbook Ponzi scheme. I dug deeper, mapping the outbound expenditures. A staggering portion of the stolen capital was being routed to high-end vendors across the city. He was bleeding the accounts dry to pay for premium catering, imported floral arrangements, and bespoke tailoring. He was funding his entire $200,000 wedding using stolen retirement money. The lavish event was not a celebration of love. It was a calculated theatrical performance. I scanned the upcoming guest list Chloe had excitedly shared with me weeks ago. The reception was packed with prominent East Coast venture capitalists and wealthy angel investors. Julian was using the opulent setting to project an aura of immense liquidity and untouchable success. He intended to dazzle those heavy-hitting investors with his fake prosperity, luring them into handing over millions in fresh capital to keep his sinking ship afloat. I isolated the specific transactions linked to Chloe grandparents. The theft was systematic and ruthless. He had drained 80% of their life savings in less than 4 months. My fingers flew across the keyboard, initiating a secure download protocol to pull the raw ledgers onto an encrypted flash drive. Before the progress bar could reach 20%, my cell phone buzzed loudly inside my cup holder. The caller identification displayed the name Barbara. It was Chloe Mother. I answered the call, expecting a reluctant apology for her daughter behaving like a shallow tyrant. I assumed Barbara was calling to smooth things over and beg me to attend the wedding as a gesture of goodwill. I was profoundly mistaken. Victoria Barbara began, her tone lacking any trace of maternal warmth. It was sharp, condescending, and heavy with an unearned sense of superiority. Chloe just called me from the restaurant. She said you reacted very poorly to being asked to step down from the bridal party. I kept my voice perfectly level, suppressing the urge to laugh at the sheer absurdity of the accusation. I simply told her I understood, Barbara. I did not cause a scene. Well, you need to understand that this wedding requires a very specific level of sophistication. Barbara continued lecturing me, as if I were an insubordinate employee rather than a family friend. Julian is operating in a very elite circle now. The people attending this event expect a certain caliber of presentation. We cannot have any dark clouds or bitter energy ruining the photographs. I expect you to attend as a guest and keep a low profile. Do not do anything to embarrass Julian. The blind adoration in her voice when she spoke his name made my stomach turn. He had successfully manipulated the entire family, projecting the image of a financial savior while quietly robbing them blind. "Julian is managing a lot of capital right now," I said, carefully testing the waters to see how deep her delusion ran. "You must be very proud of his success." Barbara took the bait effortlessly. Her ego demanded she brag about her future son-in-law. "He is an absolute prodigy, Victoria. He is tripling the returns on our portfolio. In fact, we believe in his vision so much that her father and I took out a second mortgage on the family estate last week. We wired the equity straight into his new expansion fund. The returns will pay off the house by next year." A cold, paralyzing dread settled into my chest. The air in the car suddenly felt suffocating. They had mortgaged their ancestral home. The property that had been in their family for 3 generations was now tied to a fraudulent shell company. Julian had convinced them to hand over their ultimate safety net to feed his insatiable greed. They were utter victims trapped in a delusion. If I drove to the authorities right now and handed over the incomplete data, the Ponzi scheme would collapse within hours. The federal investigators would freeze Julian accounts. But white-collar criminals are remarkably adept at spinning narratives. Julian would claim a sudden market crash destroyed the funds. He would hire defense attorneys to delay the proceedings for years. The missing money would never be recovered, and the bank would foreclose on Barbara House within months. Worse yet, the family would never believe me. They were so intoxicated by the illusion of wealth that they would view my intervention as an act of jealous sabotage. Chloe would accuse me of destroying her fairy tale wedding out of spite. Barbara would blame me for triggering the financial panic that cost them their home. They would protect the very man who ruined them, and I would become the villain in their twisted tragedy. A standard exposure would not work. I could not simply pull the alarm and watch the building burn. I needed to let the wedding proceed. I needed Julian to feel so invincible that he tightened his own noose in front of an audience he could not manipulate. I needed a trap so flawless and so legally devastating that he would have no room to breathe, let alone formulate a lie. I listened to Barbara ramble for another minute about the importance of family loyalty before quietly ending the call. I looked at the flash drive resting in my hand. The raw data was a powerful weapon, but I required an executioner who understood the brutal mechanics of federal securities law. I put the car in gear and pulled out of the parking lot. I was not heading home. I was driving straight to the downtown district to find the one man who could turn these digital footprints into a federal indictment. It was time to pay a visit to my brother-in-law. The drive to the financial district was a blur of calculating thoughts and shifting traffic. I parked in the subterranean garage of the towering glass skyscraper that housed the Regional Enforcement Division of the Securities and Exchange Commission. My brother-in-law, Marcus, was a senior federal prosecutor there. A towering African-American man with a brilliant, unyielding legal mind, Marcus possessed a reputation for dismantling corporate fraud rings with surgical precision. He viewed the financial world in absolute terms of compliance and criminality. I bypassed the reception desk, using my clearance badge, and walked directly into his corner office. Marcus was leaning over a stack of legal briefs holding a fountain pen. He looked up, his sharp eyes immediately registering the cold, focused intensity radiating from my posture. I did not offer a polite greeting. I stepped up to his heavy oak desk and placed the encrypted flash drive firmly onto the polished wood. "Pull up your isolated terminal," I instructed, keeping my voice low. "You need to look at these ledgers right now." Marcus did not ask questions. He recognized the tone. He slid the drive into a secure offline computer used specifically for analyzing sensitive financial data without triggering external network alerts. The spreadsheet populated the screen. I stood behind his chair, watching his eyes track the rapid flow of numbers. He absorbed the data points with terrifying speed. It took him exactly 3 minutes to synthesize the entire fraudulent architecture. He is commingling client capital. Marcus stated, his voice a deep, resonant baritone devoid of any shock. He is using fresh deposits to pay out artificial yields to older accounts. This is not just poor management, Victoria. He has constructed a textbook Ponzi scheme. The routing structure indicates blatant violations of the Investment Advisors Act. This constitutes severe federal securities fraud. He used his fiancée grandparents' retirement fund to pay for the wedding caterer, I added, pointing to a specific highlighted transaction line. And her parents just mortgaged their ancestral estate to feed his expansion fund. Marcus leaned back in his leather chair, exhaling a slow, measured breath. His expression hardened into a mask of pure prosecutorial intent. He is a predator bleeding his own inner circle dry. I will draft a subpoena for his primary banking records immediately. We can secure a federal freeze on his operating accounts by tomorrow morning. We pull the plug before he burns through the rest of the equity. No, I countered my tone, slicing through the quiet office. If you freeze the accounts tomorrow, the money is already gone. The parents lose their home and the grandparents lose their retirement. Julian will hire a defense firm, drag the proceedings out for years, and claim market volatility caused the deficit. He needs to believe he is untouchable. He needs to execute a move so brazen and public that he incriminates himself beyond any shadow of a reasonable doubt. Marcus narrowed his eyes, studying me intently. You want to let the wedding happen. You want to trap him in front of the investors he plans to pitch. Before I could confirm the strategy, my cell phone vibrated violently against the wood of his desk. The harsh buzzing sound shattered the tense silence of the office. The caller identification displayed Chloe name. I stared at the glowing screen. Less than 2 hours ago, she had sat in a luxury steakhouse dismissing me as a visual inconvenience. Now she was calling with a frantic, erratic persistence. I swiped to accept the call and put the phone on speaker, allowing Marcus to hear the impending chaos. Victoria, her voice shrieked through the speaker, cracking with hysterical panic. Please tell me you can help. You have to help me right now. I maintained my chilling composure. What is wrong, Chloe? I thought you were finalizing the floral arrangements. The venue, she sobbed, her words tumbling over each other in a desperate, breathless rush. The Historical Society just called me. They canceled our contract. They completely canceled the wedding, Victoria. We are 2 weeks away from the date, and I have nowhere to go. I glanced at Marcus, who simply raised an eyebrow. The timing was remarkably precise. Why would they cancel a binding contract this close to the event? I asked, playing the role of the concerned friend flawlessly. Did you miss a deadline? It was a banking error. Chloe cried loudly, defensive indignation bleeding through her tears. Julian submitted the final $200,000 cashier check this morning. The venue coordinator claimed the bank rejected the payment. They said the account was frozen due to suspicious activity flags. Julian is screaming at his wealth manager right now, trying to fix the routing issue, but the venue refused to wait. They voided the contract and kept our initial deposit. My entire wedding is ruined. The digital execution had begun without our intervention. The automated fraud detection algorithms at Julian Bank had finally caught up to his reckless internal transfers. The system flagged the massive withdrawal and placed an administrative hold on his stolen funds. The facade was cracking. I do not know what to do, Chloe wailed, the sound echoing harshly in the quiet federal office. Every luxury venue in the tri-state area is booked solid for the next 2 years. I cannot host those venture capitalists in a cheap banquet hall. Julian needs this event to look flawless for his investors. Please, Victoria, you know everyone in commercial real estate. You have connections. You have to find me a venue. I looked at the phone and a slow, terrifying smile spread across my face. The sheer, magnificent irony of the universe was presenting me with the ultimate weapon. Chloe had banished me from her bridal party because my professional aesthetic clashed with her old money vision. She believed my corporate suits lacked the soft, refined elegance required for her photographs. She had absolutely no idea about the depth of my real estate portfolio. I preferred stealth wealth, utilizing anonymous corporate trusts to acquire premium assets without attracting public scrutiny. She did not know that 3 years ago, my development firm had aggressively acquired a distressed historical property on the edge of the city. We spent millions meticulously restoring the sprawling grounds, the imported marble fountains, and the vaulted grand ballroom. It was the most exclusive, highly coveted event space in the region. She had no idea that the woman she deemed unfit for her wedding photos was the sole anonymous owner of the Monarch Estate. I might know of a cancellation. I said, my voice smooth and perfectly modulated to convey comforting reassurance. "There is a private estate. It is highly exclusive, not listed on the public market. I can make a phone call and see if the dates align." "Oh my God! Victoria, thank you!" Chloe gasped, her tone instantly shifting from despair to cloying gratitude. "You are a lifesaver. I promise Julian will wire the funds the second his bank clears the stupid security hold. We will pay whatever they ask. I will arrange a meeting for tomorrow morning," I promised cleanly, severing the call. I picked up my phone and looked at Marcus. The federal prosecutor was leaning forward, resting his elbows on the desk, a predatory gleam illuminating his dark eyes. He saw the architecture of the trap forming in real time. "You are going to give him the venue," Marcus stated, a statement of fact rather than a question. "I am not giving him anything," I replied, sliding the encrypted flash drive back into my pocket. "I am going to lease him the perfect stage for his own destruction, and I am going to make him sign a contract that gives me the keys to his entire fraudulent kingdom." The heavy frosted glass doors of my midtown office swung inward, lacking any of the usual professional grace. Chloe and Julian marched past my executive assistant, radiating a frantic, chaotic energy that instantly disrupted the quiet hum of the commercial real estate firm I had built from the ground up. I sat behind my custom walnut desk, wearing a structured ivory blazer, projecting the exact opposite of their spiraling panic. I did not stand to greet them. I simply gestured toward the 2 leather guest chairs positioned opposite my workspace. Julian dropped into the chair with an exhausted, aggressive sigh, attempting to reclaim his usual dominant posture. He wore the quintessential uniform of a venture capital tech bro, sporting a dark tailored vest over a designer t-shirt topped off with a rare imported timepiece that I now knew was funded by stolen pension money. He stretched his legs out, crossing his ankles, trying to look like a man mildly inconvenienced, rather than a criminal on the verge of total exposure. Chloe sat on the very edge of her seat. Her designer makeup was smudged under her eyes, revealing the raw terror hiding beneath her curated social media persona. "Victoria, we are in a serious bind," Chloe began, her voice trembling as she clutched her expensive handbag. "The Historical Society locked us out. They canceled the catering, the security, the floral staging. Everything is gone. You said you had a connection to the Monarch Estate. Please tell me you can get us in." Before I could answer, Julian held up a hand, silencing his fiancée. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on my desk, attempting to commandeer the negotiation. "Let us keep things in perspective," Vic Julian stated, flashing a tight, patronizing smile. "It is a minor logistical hiccup. My primary holding account is routing a significant liquidity transfer through a Swiss intermediary bank. The international compliance protocols triggered an automated fraud hold on my domestic checking. It is a standard banking glitch. The funds will clear by Monday, but these historical society vendors lack the corporate patience to wait for overseas wires. We just need a venue to bridge the gap." I maintained steady eye contact, absorbing his ridiculous fabrication. Any entry-level auditor knew that legitimate overseas transfers did not randomly freeze domestic retail checking accounts. He was lying through his teeth, covering up the fact that his Ponzi scheme had hit a critical cash flow bottleneck. "I understand how frustrating international banking regulations can be, Julian," I replied, keeping my tone sympathetic and devoid of accusation. "Fortunately, my firm does not just have a connection to the Monarch Estate. We acquired the holding trust that manages the property 3 years ago. I control the booking calendar." Chloe gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. "You own it! Victoria, that is incredible. You have to let us use it. We will owe you our lives." Julian shifted in his chair, his eyes narrowing slightly. The revelation that the woman his fiancée had just demoted for lacking aesthetic value actually owned the most exclusive property in the city bruised his fragile ego. He immediately tried to regain the upper hand by pivoting to his favorite tactic: financial manipulation. "That is great news," Julian said, his voice dripping with unearned arrogance. "Since we are dealing directly with a friend, we can bypass the usual bureaucratic red tape. We need the estate for the full weekend. Given the short notice and our long-standing relationship with Chloe, I expect you can offer us a steep discount. Consider it a wedding gift. I will wire you a flat fee once my Swiss accounts unfreeze." He was asking me to subsidize his fraudulent lifestyle while he actively stole from his future in-laws. The entitlement was staggering. I did not glare at him. I did not call him a thief. I deployed the exact same strategy I used when acquiring distressed corporate assets. I smiled and handed him the rope. "I want Chloe to have the perfect day," I said, opening my desk drawer. I pulled out a thick legal document bound in a blue linen cover. "I will waive the standard location rental fee entirely." Chloe let out a loud squeal of relief, reaching across the desk to grab my hand. However, I continued smoothly pulling my hand back to rest it on the document. The Monarch Estate operates under strict municipal preservation laws. Because we are booking this event merely 14 days prior to execution, traditional event insurance underwriters will not cover the liability. I have to contract emergency private security premium catering staffs and expedited permits. Those external vendors require immediate guaranteed underwriting. Julian frowned, staring at the blue folder. "What exactly are you saying?" I slid the document across the polished walnut surface until it stopped directly in front of him. "I am saying I will save your wedding, Julian, but to bypass the external insurance agencies, you must sign a personal guarantee contract." I placed a silver pen next to the folder. "This contract states that you assume direct personal and corporate liability for the total operating costs of the event. It covers the catering, the structural deposits, and the security details. It is a standard fail-safe for high-risk short-notice bookings." Julian let out a scoffing laugh, flipping the cover open. He skimmed the first page, pretending to comprehend the dense legal formatting. "A personal guarantee. Vic, I manage a hedge fund. My signature is worth more than this entire building. I have no problem backing the event costs." He was so eager to project wealth that he failed to scrutinize the architecture of the agreement. He flipped to the back pages, searching for the signature line. "Just a moment, Julian," I interjected, my voice dropping to a calm, authoritative register. "You need to review Clause 8. He paused, his eyes scanning the designated paragraph. "Clause 8 is our emergency indemnification provision," I explained, leaning back in my chair. "Because you are relying on pending international wires, my firm requires a structural collateral guarantee. If your Swiss accounts fail to clear and the final invoice is not remitted within 48 hours of the reception, my real estate firm is granted immediate auditing rights. We gain direct legal access to the financial architecture of your designated corporate holding entities to recover the debt." I watched his face. The bait was dangling right in front of him. Clause 8 was not a standard real estate provision. It was a Trojan horse. If Julian signed that document, he was legally authorizing my company to pierce his corporate veil. He was voluntarily signing away his financial privacy. In the event of a payment default, the contract granted me the civilian authority to bypass his firewalls, access his shell companies, and examine his overseas routing numbers. He hesitated. A flicker of genuine panic flashed behind his eyes. His survival instincts warned him that granting an external entity access to his books was a fatal risk. He opened his mouth, likely to argue the clause or suggest an alternative holding company. But Chloe intervened. "Julian, just sign it," she pleaded, her voice rising in frantic desperation. "The wedding is in 2 weeks. The invitations are already mailed. The venture capitalists already booked their flights. If we lose this venue, we will be a laughingstock. Everyone will think your fund is failing. You said the money would clear on Monday. Just sign the paper so I can secure the florists." She hit his exact vulnerability. She threatened his public image. For a narcissist running a Ponzi scheme, the illusion of success is more valuable than oxygen. If he refused to sign a basic collateral agreement in front of his fiancée, he would admit he lacked the liquidity he constantly bragged about. The house of cards would collapse right here in my office. His ego could not tolerate the humiliation. He gritted his teeth, grabbed the silver pen, and slashed his signature across the bottom of the page. He flipped to the addendum, writing down the exact corporate tax identification numbers for his primary cryptocurrency holding firms. He tied his fraudulent network directly to my contract. "There," Julian snapped, tossing the pen onto my desk. "You have your guarantee. The funds will be in your account long before the reception starts. You will not need to audit anything." I pulled the blue folder back across the desk, closing it with a sharp, definitive snap. I looked down at his signature, feeling a cold rush of predatory triumph. "I am sure the transaction will be seamless, Julian," I replied. They stood up. Chloe looked instantly revitalized, her vanity fully restored now that her aesthetic background was secured. She offered a quick, hollow thank you before rushing out the glass doors to call her wedding planner. Julian lingered for a second, adjusting the cuffs of his tailored shirt. He offered me a patronizing wink, telling me I drove a hard bargain for a girl who used to split pizza bills in college. I watched him follow his fiancée out of the suite. He had absolutely no idea what he had just done. To secure a federal warrant to search a hedge fund, an investigator like Marcus required months of gathered evidence, sworn affidavits, and a willing judge. It was a slow, grueling process that gave criminals ample time to shred documents and move capital to non-extradition jurisdictions. By manipulating his pride and leveraging his desperate need for a wedding venue, I had entirely bypassed the federal justice system. Julian had willingly handed me a legally binding contract, granting me the right to crack open his ledgers the second his payment bounced. I did not need a subpoena. I had his signature. I locked the blue folder inside my desk drawer. The legal snare was armed and waiting. The trap would snap shut the moment his finances failed. But before the wedding arrived, I had to endure the social theater Chloe had orchestrated. My phone chimed with a calendar reminder. The upcoming weekend featured her highly anticipated bridal shower, a gathering of her curated high society friends. It was the perfect environment to deploy the next phase of the investigation. The financial documents would provide the numbers, but I needed vocal proof of the conspiracy. I needed to hear the lies straight from the source. I closed my laptop, preparing to step into a room full of venomous women armed with nothing but a stealth recording device and unbreakable patience. The bridal shower was hosted at a trendy rooftop lounge in Soho, a venue chosen entirely for its panoramic views and optimal natural lighting. I arrived exactly on time, stepping off the private elevator into a sea of pastel silk and forced laughter. The air was thick with the scent of expensive champagne and relentless social climbing. Chloe held court near a towering floral arrangement, wearing a white designer dress that cost more than my first car. Surrounding her was the newly assembled bridal party, the women who had successfully met her stringent aesthetic requirements. They were a flock of Instagram influencers and minor reality television personalities possessing flawless complexions and zero genuine connection to the bride. They held their flutes of Prosecco like props, angling their bodies perfectly for the hired photographer circling the room. I wore a simple black cashmere turtleneck and tailored trousers blending seamlessly into the background. I was not there to celebrate. I was there on a reconnaissance mission. Pinned discreetly inside the lining of my leather handbag was a high-definition directional audio recorder. The device was legally permissible under New York, one-party consent recording laws, provided I remained a party to the conversations I captured. But sometimes the most damning information is gleaned when you fade entirely from view. I walked toward the perimeter of the lounge, grabbing a glass of sparkling water from a passing tray. I watched the performance unfold. A tall blonde woman named Harper, the newly appointed maid of honor, leaned in to inspect my outfit as I passed her group. Her gaze dragged slowly from my sensible loafers to my unbranded handbag. She let out a soft, theatrical sigh, loud enough for her companions to hear. "It is so brave to wear office attire to a bridal shower," Harper murmured, offering a pitying smile. "I suppose not everyone understands event curation. Julian was so generous to fly us all out to Tulum for the bachelorette trip. He truly understands how to treat top-tier talent." I offered a polite, unbothered nod and continued walking. The insult rolled off me without leaving a mark. I found a quiet alcove near the secondary bar, partially obscured by a massive potted palm tree. I set my handbag down on a small cocktail table, ensuring the hidden microphone faced outward toward the main seating area. I observed the room cataloging the behaviors of the women Chloe had elevated above our decade-long friendship. They did not talk about childhood memories or shared experiences. Their conversations were purely transactional, dominated by discussions of follower counts, brand sponsorships, and the immense wealth Julian possessed. About 20 minutes into the event, Harper and another bridesmaid, a brunette named Mia, drifted away from the main group and settled onto a plush velvet sofa situated just on the other side of my palm tree barrier. They were unaware of my presence, hidden in the shadowed alcove. I took a sip of my water, remaining perfectly still. The background music swelled, masking their voices from the general crowd, but my close proximity and the sensitive audio recorder captured every single syllable. Harper checked her phone, swirling the last drop of champagne in her glass. "Did Julian process the retainer for this month yet?" she asked, her voice dropping its artificial, cheerful pitch. "My lease in Tribeca is due on the 1st, and my management team is breathing down my neck about the PR fees." Mia leaned closer, checking her manicured nails. "The wire hit my account yesterday. $10,000 right on schedule. I do not understand why you are stressed, Harper. This is the easiest contract we have ever secured. We do absolutely nothing." I stopped breathing. The term retainer used by a bridesmaid discussing the groom sent an immediate shockwave through my analytical mind. "I know it is easy," Harper replied, sounding irritated. "But the liability makes me nervous. My agent warned me about putting my legal name on financial documents. Julian told us we just need to sit on the board of directors for his cryptocurrency fund for 6 months. He said having young female entrepreneurs listed as independent board members helps him secure diversity grants and builds trust with institutional investors on Wall Street." "It is just a figurehead position," Mia countered, rolling her eyes. "He needed clean names without any prior SEC violations to pad his corporate prospectus before the big funding round next week. We sign a few digital DocuSigns, attend a couple of Zoom meetings on mute, and collect $10,000 a month. It is literally free money. Stop overthinking it. He manages millions. He knows how to handle the compliance paperwork." The magnitude of their conversation hit me with the force of a physical blow. These women were not just shallow socialites chosen for a cohesive wedding aesthetic. They were active participants in a massive corporate conspiracy. Julian had purchased their loyalty and their clean backgrounds. He was installing unqualified influencers as independent board members for a fraudulent hedge fund. This maneuver was a deliberate, calculated violation of federal financial regulations. By listing them on his corporate prospectus, Julian was falsely assuring major Wall Street investors that his fund possessed independent oversight and governance. He was using their social media credibility to validate his Ponzi scheme. The $10,000 monthly payments were not gifts. They were bribes paid directly from the stolen retirement funds of elderly victims to maintain a criminal facade. Chloe had not merely replaced me as a bridesmaid. She had unwittingly surrounded herself with corporate accomplices. I reached down and subtly tapped my handbag, ensuring the recording device was still active. I had just captured a recorded confession of corporate fraud and conspiracy. The audio file was the exact key Marcus needed to upgrade the investigation from simple embezzlement to a coordinated racketeering enterprise. I needed to secure the data and leave the venue immediately. I picked up my bag and stepped out from the alcove, preparing to make a quiet exit toward the elevators. I did not move fast enough. Chloe had been scanning the room looking for the photographer when she spotted me emerging from behind the palm tree. The radiant bridal smile vanished from her face, replaced instantly by a scowl of deep, unvarnished resentment. She marched across the lounge, her designer heels clicking sharply against the floorboards. She intercepted me before I could reach the exit. "Victoria, what exactly are you doing, lurking in the shadows?" Chloe demanded, her voice rising loudly enough to draw the attention of the surrounding guests. Harper and Mia looked up from the velvet sofa, their eyes widening slightly as they realized how close I had been standing. "I am just grabbing some water, Chloe," I replied, keeping my tone flat and non-threatening. The event is lovely. I was actually just heading out to deal with a work emergency. You are always dealing with a work emergency, she snapped, crossing her arms defensively. You have been standing in the corner all afternoon judging everyone. I can feel your negative energy radiating across the room. You have not mingled. You have not congratulated me. You are just wearing that depressing black outfit and making my friends uncomfortable. The guests fell silent, turning their attention to the escalating confrontation. Harper stood up, sensing the tension, and stepped behind Chloe, adopting a supportive, aggressive stance. I am not judging anyone, Chloe, I said, locking eyes with her. I am simply observing the company you choose to keep. The subtle double meaning flew completely over her head, but Harper shifted uncomfortably, clearly paranoid about what I might have overheard. Chloe's face flushed with anger. She reached out and violently snatched the glass of sparkling water directly from my hand. The sudden movement caused the water to slosh over the rim, splashing onto my cashmere sleeve. She slammed the glass down onto a nearby cocktail table. You think you are so superior because you sit in an office all day, Chloe hissed, stepping uncomfortably close. You think you are better than Julian and me because you own some buildings. You are just bitter because I am marrying a man who is building a massive empire while you die alone with your spreadsheets. I asked you to come as a guest to be supportive, but you cannot even do that right. Leave. Get out of my party right now. I looked at the water soaking into my sleeve. I looked at the angry, entitled woman standing in front of me, defending a man who was actively destroying her family financial future. She was demanding my exit, oblivious to the fact that I held the loaded weapon that would soon annihilate her entire reality. I did not raise my voice. I did not defend my choices. I simply picked up my leather handbag, holding the recording device firmly against my side. I am leaving, Chloe. I stated, my voice carrying a quiet, lethal authority that made Harper physically step back. Enjoy your celebration. I hope your empire is built on a very solid foundation. I turned and walked toward the private elevator. I felt the collective stares of the bridal party burning into my back, but the judgment meant absolutely nothing. Let them mock my wardrobe. Let them call me bitter. They were celebrating in a house of cards, and I was walking away holding the match. The elevator doors slid shut, sealing me in the quiet descent to the lobby. I pulled out my phone and dialed Marcus. I did not have to wait for Julian check to bounce anymore. I had the vocal evidence required to initiate a federal strike. However, as the elevator reached the ground floor, my screen flashed with an incoming priority alert from my corporate security system. The notification indicated an unauthorized physical entry attempt at my private development office. Someone was actively trying to bypass the security doors at my firm. The digital log displayed the name registered to the visitor pass used at the lobby desk. Julian. The predator had realized he was being hunted. He was not waiting for the wedding. He was waiting for me in my own sanctuary. The recording in my bag was safe, but I was walking directly into a physical confrontation. I gripped my phone, tightened my jaw, and hailed a cab. The real war was about to begin. The taxi ride back to my commercial real estate headquarters felt like navigating through a chessboard. The city blurred past my window while my mind assembled the legal architecture of a takedown. I directed the driver to drop me at the secure subterranean entrance of my building. Marcus, my brother-in-law, was already waiting for me inside the climate-controlled server room on the ground floor. As a senior federal prosecutor for the Securities and Exchange Commission, Marcus treated financial anomalies like crime scenes. He stood near the humming server racks, his tall frame projecting a calm, intimidating authority. I placed my leather handbag onto the stainless steel table and extracted the hidden recording device. I did not waste time with pleasantries. I told Marcus to pull up his isolated terminal because we had a timeline to compress. Marcus plugged the audio file into his secure interface. We stood in silence, listening to the clear, high-definition playback of the bridesmaids confessing in the rooftop lounge. We heard Harper and Mia admit to accepting $10,000 monthly payments in exchange for posing as independent board members on Julian corporate prospectus. Marcus steepled his fingers, his dark eyes locking onto the monitor. He noted that Julian was fabricating corporate governance to mislead institutional investors. It was a calculated breach of fiduciary duty, but Marcus needed to see the money trail to elevate the charge to a federal indictment. I opened my encrypted laptop and connected it to the secure network. Thanks to the personal guarantee contract Julian had so arrogantly signed earlier that week, I held the legal key to pierce his corporate veil. The indemnification clause granted my firm the right to audit his holding companies to verify his liquidity. I initiated a targeted scan of his primary banking ledgers, mapping the transactional flow in real time. The data materialized on the screen, painting a bleak, horrifying picture of unearned wealth. We traced the outbound wire transfers paying the fake board members. I ran a reverse trace on the origin of those specific funds. The routing numbers did not connect to any legitimate venture capital returns or cryptocurrency yields. The capital originated from a pooled municipal pension account. Julian was actively draining the retirement savings of public school teachers and elderly civil servants to finance his fraudulent lifestyle and buy the loyalty of Instagram influencers. Marcus leaned closer to the screen, his jaw tight with righteous professional anger. He stated that this was a textbook wire fraud operation. Julian was running a predatory Ponzi scheme using a lavish wedding as a marketing tool to trap larger investors. Marcus confirmed we had enough digital evidence to secure a grand jury subpoena and freeze the entire operation. Before we could strategize the optimal moment to execute the federal freeze, the secure phone on the wall blinked with an urgent red light. I picked up the receiver. My head of security reported that an unauthorized visitor had bypassed the main lobby reception and was demanding access to my private executive suite on the 40th floor. The visitor had used a fake delivery credential to access the private elevators. The digital log displayed the name of the intruder. It was Julian. The predator had sniffed out the trap. Julian realized my firm had initiated a credit audit on his shell companies. He was not waiting for his wedding day. He had marched directly into my sanctuary to confront me. I looked at Marcus and told him to stay in the server room and monitor the audio feeds. I needed to handle this intrusion personally. The federal prosecutor gave a short nod, advising me to give the desperate man enough rope to hang himself. I took the private elevator up to the top floor. The polished marble corridors of my development firm were normally a haven of quiet productivity. Today, the atmosphere felt incredibly tense. I pushed open the frosted glass doors of my corner office. Julian was standing behind my custom walnut desk, running his hands over my proprietary architectural blueprints. He wore a sharp navy suit attempting to project an aura of unshakable dominance. He did not look like a man whose wedding venue had just canceled. He looked like a cornered animal preparing to bite. Julian skipped any polite greeting. He turned to face me, his voice holding a lethal, sharp edge. He announced that his compliance software had flagged an external audit on his holding companies an hour ago. He accused me of using the venue contract to dig into his private ledgers. I maintained a steady, upright posture, folding my hands in front of me. I calmly explained that he had signed a binding financial agreement. I told him due diligence was a standard operating procedure when underwriting a high-risk event space for a client with frozen bank accounts. He let out a short, abrasive laugh and stepped around the desk. He closed the physical distance between us, invading my personal space. The scent of his heavy cologne hung in the filtered air. He thought his physical proximity would intimidate me. He assumed a woman working in a male-dominated industry would shrink under his looming presence. Julian sneered, telling me I was not conducting due diligence. He claimed I was trying to sabotage Chloe because I was bitter about being removed from the bridal party. He told me I was digging through his finances, hoping to find a clerical error to ruin their reception out of pure spite. He reached inside his tailored jacket and extracted a thick manila folder. He tossed it onto the glass surface of my coffee table with a resounding thud. Julian warned me that he was not playing my real estate games. He stated, his tone dropping into a menacing whisper, that he had done some digging of his own while I was busy playing detective. He pointed at the folder and explained its contents. He knew my flagship development project in the financial district was weeks away from a major public unveiling. It was a multi-million-dollar commercial asset that housed prime retail and corporate tenants. He leaned closer, his eyes dark and calculating. Julian revealed that he had a contact working at a freelance environmental testing agency. For a few $1,000s, his contact was willing to draft a highly convincing fabricated report stating my construction crews had used toxic lead paint and banned asbestos materials in the ventilation systems. I stared at him, keeping my facial muscles entirely neutral. A fabricated environmental hazard report would trigger an immediate municipal shutdown. The city inspectors would halt all construction pending a full review. It would cost my firm millions in delayed tenant move-ins and irreparably tarnish my professional reputation in the real estate sector. He was threatening to manufacture a fake public health crisis just to protect his fragile ego. I asked him if he would really risk a false media smear campaign. I ensured my voice carried the perfect pitch of feigned vulnerability, making him believe his threat had landed a critical blow. Julian smiled a cold, terrifying expression of triumph. He confirmed he would forward the fake report to every major news outlet in the city by tomorrow morning. He boasted that my investors would pull their funding before lunchtime and my entire commercial empire would collapse into dust. He paused, letting the heavy threat settle over the quiet office. Then he outlined his demands. He stepped back, straightening his tie with a smug sense of victory. He told me I could avoid the scandal if I agreed to comp the entire Monarch Estate rental. He demanded the venue, the premium catering, and the security detail provided 100% free of charge. He also insisted I sign a non-disclosure agreement forbidding me from ever discussing his financial portfolios with anyone. He presented it as a simple trade. I cover his wedding costs, and my shiny new building opens without a single toxic headline. He was using a fabricated media crisis to force a financial concession. He believed he held the ultimate trump card. He thought he had outmaneuvered the strict corporate developer, forcing me to submit to his demands to save my livelihood. I lowered my gaze, allowing my shoulders to slump. I manufactured a look of profound defeat, biting my lower lip as if holding back tears of panic. I whispered his name, projecting a flawless imitation of a broken woman. I told him he won. I agreed to waive the venue fees and promised to draft the addendum right away. I begged him not to release the environmental report. Julian chuckled, a sound of pure arrogance. He buttoned his suit jacket, looking incredibly pleased with himself. He stated he knew I would see reason. He ordered me to send the amended contract to his assistant by tonight. He turned on his heel and strode out of my office, the heavy glass doors swinging shut behind him. He walked away, believing he had conquered a titan of industry. I stood in the quiet office, letting the silence wash over me. The fake panic instantly melted from my face, replaced by a razor-sharp focus. I turned my head toward the subtle smoke detector mounted in the corner of the ceiling. Concealed within the unnoticeable plastic casing was a 4K resolution security camera equipped with highly sensitive directional microphones. The system was hardwired to an encrypted off-site server that Marcus was currently monitoring downstairs. Julian had just delivered a textbook execution of felony extortion. He had explicitly threatened my commercial enterprise to extract a financial benefit. He had articulated the crime with pristine clarity, looking right into the lens of my hidden surveillance network. The securities fraud would dismantle his hedge fund, but the extortion charge would guarantee his immediate incarceration without the possibility of bail. I picked up my phone and dialed Marcus. The bait had been taken perfectly. Julian thought he had secured a free luxury venue, but his financial hemorrhage was far from over. Now it was time to watch the groom panic when his catering checks inevitably bounced, and the true mastermind from the Cayman Islands came calling. I printed the amended venue contract and slid it across the glass surface of my desk. My hands performed a calculated tremor, playing the role of a woman cornered by a superior adversary. Julian grabbed the paperwork with a smug, self-satisfied grin. He scrawled his signature across the bottom line, believing his fabricated environmental hazard threat had successfully bent a commercial real estate developer to his will. He folded the document and tucked it inside his tailored jacket, patting his chest. He leaned against the edge of my desk, projecting the aura of a conqueror, giving me a patronizing look. He told me it was a smart business decision and that Chloe would be thrilled her dream aesthetic was preserved. He turned toward the frosted glass doors ready to exit my office and celebrate his extortion. I waited until his hand touched the door handle before deploying the secondary snare. "Julian," I called out, keeping my tone hesitant and deferential. "The venue rental is zeroed out just as you demanded, but there is one minor logistical hurdle we need to clear before I can hand over the keys to the Monarch Estate." He stopped, his shoulders tensing slightly. He slowly turned around, dropping his triumphant posture. He asked what else could possibly be missing. I gestured to my computer monitor. "The estate is yours, but the third-party culinary vendor operates on a separate ledger. Laurent Culinary Arts requires a direct deposit to secure the imported Wagyu beef and the vintage champagne Chloe specifically requested for the venture capital investors. The vendor requires a $40,000 initial payment today. Since we are bypassing the standard booking window, they will not accept a wire transfer. They require a direct point-of-sale credit authorization to begin prepping the menu." Julian let out a loud, arrogant scoff, rolling his eyes. He walked back to my desk, pulling a sleek leather wallet from his interior pocket. He acted as though $40,000 was the equivalent of a loose coin found in a sofa cushion. He told me to run his card and get the caterers working immediately. He pulled out a heavy titanium credit card issued by a premium banking institution and tossed it onto my desk. The metal hit the glass with a sharp, distinct clink. I picked up the card and inserted it into the encrypted payment terminal sitting next to my keyboard. I typed in the $40,000 amount. Julian stood there adjusting his expensive watch, radiating profound impatience. The terminal hummed, processing the encrypted data. 3 seconds later, the machine emitted a sharp, flat beep. A bright red error message illuminated the small digital screen. "Transaction declined. Insufficient funds." I kept my facial muscles entirely neutral. I looked up at Julian, offering a polite, apologetic smile. I told him the terminal rejected the charge. I suggested his bank might have placed a security hold on the account due to the sudden large expenditure. A flash of genuine raw panic breached his arrogant facade. The color drained from his cheeks, leaving his artificial tan looking sickly and hollow. He snatched the titanium card from my hand, staring at the chip as if the metal itself had betrayed him. He muttered a string of curses, blaming the automated fraud detection algorithms at his bank. He claimed his wealth manager was incompetent and had failed to authorize the daily spending limit. He dug into his wallet again, pulling out a secondary black card. He shoved it into my hand, his voice tightening with suppressed anxiety. He ordered me to run the backup account, stating it was tied directly to his corporate operational fund. I slid the second card into the terminal. The machine processed the data. Another sharp beep echoed in the quiet office. The screen flashed the identical red warning. Transaction declined. The silence that followed was suffocating. Julian stared at the glowing red text on the terminal, his chest rising and falling in erratic, shallow jerks. The illusion of the untouchable hedge fund manager was dissolving in real time. He was a man standing in a bespoke suit attempting to host a $200,000 social event, and he could not even clear a basic catering deposit. His domestic accounts were entirely frozen, drained dry by his own Ponzi scheme obligations. I looked at him, adopting a tone of professional concern. I informed him that without the catering deposit, the event would have no food, no staff, and no alcohol. I gently pointed out that serving tap water to East Coast angel investors might damage his pristine corporate image. The threat to his public persona broke his remaining composure. Julian lunged forward, gripping the edge of my desk. His knuckles turned stark white. He glanced nervously at the frosted glass doors, ensuring my assistant was not lingering in the hallway. He leaned across the desk, invading my personal space, his breath smelling of stale coffee and desperation. "Victoria, you have to help me," he whispered, his voice stripped of all its former bravado. "I am caught in a severe liquidity trap. The SEC compliance audits are freezing my domestic transfers until the end of the month. If Chloe finds out the caterer canceled, she will cancel the wedding. I will lose the investors. I need a bridge loan. I need you to front the $40,000 right now." I maintained a cold, steady gaze. I asked him why I should risk my own capital to fund his catering when his primary accounts were clearly paralyzed. Julian swallowed hard, a bead of sweat tracing a line down his temple. He realized he needed to offer me a monumental incentive to secure the cash. He looked around the empty office, paranoia radiating from his rigid posture. He leaned even closer, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial hiss. "Because I'm about to close the biggest funding round of my life," he confessed, his eyes wide with frantic greed. "I have an anonymous angel investor operating out of the Cayman Islands. He is bypassing the traditional venture capital channels. We finalized the terms yesterday. A $5 million international wire transfer is scheduled to hit my encrypted holding account exactly 2 weeks from today. It lands directly on the morning of the wedding." My heart stalled in my chest. My forensic training initiated a rapid threat assessment. He was expecting $5 million from an anonymous offshore entity located in a notorious tax haven. The funds were being routed into an unlicensed cryptocurrency fund operating on American soil. Furthermore, the transfer was deliberately timed to land on the exact date of a massive, highly publicized social event. This was no longer a simple domestic Ponzi scheme stealing from retired teachers. In the financial crime sector, timing an illicit wire transfer to coincide with a large crowd gathering is a classic smokescreen tactic. The chaotic volume of vendor payments, guest deposits, and event expenditures provides the perfect cover to wash dirty capital. The sheer velocity of the money moving in and out of his accounts during the wedding weekend would blind standard banking regulators. Julian was not just a con artist. He was acting as a digital mule. He was engaging in international money laundering for a criminal syndicate. The offshore origin, the staggering amount, and the extreme secrecy pointed directly to cartel operations or illegal arms manufacturing. He was washing blood money through his fake hedge fund, using his own wedding as the washing machine. "If you write this check today," Julian pleaded, interrupting my silent analysis, "I will wire you $120,000 the second the Cayman funds clear. I will triple your money in 14 days, Victoria. You just have to keep this quiet. Chloe cannot know. The investors cannot know. He was offering me an $80,000 bribe to fund his criminal enterprise. He thought he was seducing a greedy real estate developer with the promise of a quick, exponential return. He had no idea he was handing a signed confession directly to a woman who had the Department of Justice on speed dial." I stared into his desperate, bloodshot eyes. I let the silence stretch, forcing him to sweat under the crushing weight of his own financial ruin. I needed him to feel the exact depth of his dependence on me. I reached across the desk and pulled my personal checkbook from the top drawer. I uncapped my fountain pen. I did not smile. I projected the cold, calculating aura of a businesswoman securing a highly lucrative illicit deal. "I will cover the catering vendor, Julian." I stated, my voice carrying a quiet, lethal finality. "I will ensure the champagne flows and the investors are properly entertained. But I expect the repayment with the agreed-upon interest the moment that offshore wire hits your ledger." Julian let out a long, ragged exhale of profound relief. He slumped back into his chair, dragging a hand across his sweaty forehead. The arrogant swagger slowly began to return to his posture as he watched me write out the $40,000 sum. He truly believed his masterful negotiation skills had saved his empire. He thought he had leveraged my greed to secure his survival. I tore the check from the binding and slid it across the glass. Julian snatched the paper, folding it carefully into his tailored jacket. He offered me a conspiratorial nod, sealing our fake partnership. He promised I would not regret the investment before turning and walking out of the executive suite, his confidence fully restored. I sat alone in the quiet office, listening to the heavy glass doors click shut. My pulse beat a slow, steady rhythm against my throat. Julian thought he had just secured a bridge loan. In reality, he had just provided the exact jurisdictional trigger required to escalate his arrest warrant from a state-level fraud charge to a full federal strike. The game had shifted from a civil dispute over a venue contract to a high-stakes international crime operation. I picked up my cell phone, preparing to dial my brother-in-law. The federal task force needed to know that the target was no longer just stealing from his in-laws. The target was preparing to catch a $5 million anvil, and we needed to be standing right there when it dropped. I watched Julian stride confidently through the glass doors of my corporate suite. his posture radiating the profound arrogance of a man who believed he had just outsmarted a commercial real estate mogul. He had the $40,000 check tucked safely against his chest, convinced his fraudulent empire was secure. I waited exactly 30 seconds, ensuring he was safely inside the descending elevator before picking up my encrypted smartphone. I dialed Marcus. The secure line connected immediately. He took the bait I stated, bypassing any preliminary greetings. He admitted his domestic accounts are frozen. He begged for a bridge loan to cover the catering deposit. Marcus let out a low hum of prosecutorial satisfaction. The desperation validates our audit. His Ponzi structure is actively collapsing. I will draft the state-level indictments this afternoon. Do not draft the state indictments. Marcus, I interrupted, my voice dropping to a sharp, urgent register. The scope of the operation just expanded. He is not just commingling local pension funds. Julian confessed he is anticipating a massive external capital injection. A $5 million wire transfer is scheduled to hit his holding accounts exactly 14 days from today. The funds are originating from an anonymous proxy located in the Cayman Islands. The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. When Marcus finally spoke, his tone had shifted entirely. The bureaucratic lawyer was gone, replaced by the lethal intensity of a federal investigator. The Cayman Islands. Marcus repeated the gravity of the location, settling heavily into the conversation. He is routing a $5 million offshore transfer into an unlicensed domestic cryptocurrency fund. That is not standard venture capital investment, Victoria. That is a textbook international money laundering pipeline. He is washing illicit capital. And he scheduled the wire to land on the exact morning of the wedding. I added, pacing behind my walnut desk. He plans to use the chaotic volume of the event expenditures to obscure the inbound transfer from regulatory oversight. He is acting as a digital mule. Marcus concluded, his mind rapidly constructing the legal framework. This changes the entire tactical approach. If we freeze his accounts today, we only catch him for the domestic securities fraud. We miss the offshore connection entirely. To trigger federal jurisdiction under the Money Laundering Control Act, we need that $5 million to physically touch an American banking institution controlled by his shell company. We need the wire to land. So we wait, I confirmed. We let the wedding proceed. We let him receive the funds. And the moment the capital hits his ledger, we drop the federal hammer. I will contact the Department of Justice immediately. Marcus instructed, his voice tight with adrenaline. I need to brief the Anti-Money Laundering Task Force. We will secure a dormant monitoring warrant. It allows us to track the inbound wire without alerting his financial institution. Keep playing your part, Victoria. Keep him feeling invincible. We have him perfectly cornered. I ended the call feeling a dark, potent thrill coursing through my veins. The trap was no longer a simple real estate contract. It was a massive federal snare designed to annihilate Julian's entire existence. I returned to my desk, ready to finalize the architectural plans for a new commercial development project. However, while I was meticulously plotting a federal takedown, Chloe was busy orchestrating a petty, vindictive high school drama. My phone vibrated aggressively across the glass surface of my desk. The screen illuminated with a rapid succession of urgent notifications. They were not internal corporate emails. They were alerts from my public relations director. I unlocked the device, tapping the primary message. It contained a single frantic sentence, followed by a hyperlinked video. You need to see this immediately. I clicked the link. The application routed me to a social media platform I rarely monitored. A video began to play, displaying Chloe sitting on the floor of her lavishly decorated apartment. She was wearing an oversized designer sweater, intentionally draped to make her look fragile and vulnerable. The strategic lighting cast soft shadows, emphasizing her tear-stained cheeks. She stared directly into the camera lens, projecting a masterful performance of profound betrayal. I never thought I would have to make a video like this, Chloe began, her voice trembling with practiced emotion. I always believed that true friends support each other during difficult times, but sometimes the people you trust the most are just waiting for the perfect moment to exploit your pain. She paused, wiping a carefully manufactured tear from her eye. The video already displayed over 2 million views. The engagement metrics were skyrocketing exponentially. As many of you know, my original wedding venue canceled our contract just 2 weeks before the big day. Chloe continued, her voice adopting a pitch of tragic desperation. I was completely devastated. My dream wedding was ruined. In my panic, I reached out to a woman I considered my best friend for over a decade. I knew her commercial real estate firm owned a beautiful private estate. I begged her to let us use it. I watched the screen, my jaw tightening as she spun her fabricated narrative. Instead of helping me, Chloe sobbed, looking away from the camera in feigned heartbreak. She saw an opportunity to profit. She knew I was desperate. She knew my fiancé was dealing with international banking delays. She held the venue hostage and forced us to sign a predatory contract demanding exorbitant fees and total control over our personal assets. She price gouged her own best friend on her wedding day just to inflate her corporate portfolio. The video cut to a dramatic black and white filter. It breaks my heart to realize that some people care more about their bank accounts than basic human decency, Chloe concluded, wiping her eyes one final time. Please protect your energy. Do not let toxic, greedy people manipulate your lowest moments. The video ended. I stared at the dark screen, the sheer audacity of her lies washing over me. I had waived the venue rental fee entirely. I had personally written a $40,000 check from my own accounts to save her catering deposit. I had salvaged her entire fraudulent wedding. And her response was to publicly brand me a predatory extortionist to millions of strangers. Chloe felt deeply insecure about her dependence on me. By asking for my help, she had internally acknowledged my success and her own vulnerability. Her massive ego could not tolerate the power dynamic. To soothe her bruised vanity, she needed to drag me down. She needed her audience to view me as a ruthless villain to justify her own cruel behavior. She was using my professional reputation as collateral damage to boost her social media engagement. The consequences of her viral tantrum materialized instantly. My office phone began to ring incessantly. My executive assistant routed a call from one of my primary investors. The investor expressed deep concern regarding the sudden influx of negative public sentiment surrounding my firm. Commercial real estate relies heavily on community trust and ethical branding. Being labeled a predatory extortionist by a weeping bride was a public relations nightmare. The comment section beneath her video was a toxic wasteland of misplaced outrage. Thousands of anonymous users were demanding my firm face a boycott. They labeled me a corporate snake. They coordinated efforts to flood my company review pages with 1-star ratings, dragging my flawless professional score down into the gutter. The public was demanding a response. My public relations director burst into my office holding a tablet, her face pale with stress. "Victoria, the video is trending nationally," my director stated, her voice urgent. "Major lifestyle blogs are picking up the story. We are receiving angry emails from current retail tenants. We need to issue a formal press release immediately. We need to release the actual venue contract showing you waived the fees to clear your name. We have to defend the brand." I looked at the panicked director. The instinct to fight back, to release the evidence and crush Chloe's fragile narrative was overwhelming. A single screenshot of the zeroed-out contract would destroy her credibility instantly. But I am not a reactive amateur. I am a strategist. I recalled Marcus' warning earlier that morning. We needed Julian to feel absolutely invincible. We needed him to believe his secrets were secure until the $5 million wire transfer successfully landed in his domestic account. If I publicly released the venue contract to defend myself, I would inadvertently reveal the emergency indemnification clause to the world. Julian would realize I was holding a legal weapon capable of auditing his shell companies. His paranoia would spike. He would panic, cancel the offshore wire transfer, and attempt to shred his financial ledgers before the authorities arrived. I would win a petty social media dispute, but I would permanently destroy a massive federal investigation. I could not pull the alarm. I had to let the building burn around me. I leaned back in my chair, projecting absolute calm. "We are not releasing a statement," I instructed, my voice flat and unyielding. "We are not publishing the contract. We will not respond to any media inquiries or social media comments." The public relations director stared at me in profound disbelief. Victoria, they are actively destroying your reputation. If we remain silent, the public will assume her allegations are completely true. It will look like an admission of guilt." "I know exactly what it looks like," I replied, staring at the dark screen of my phone. "Initiate a total media blackout, lock the comment sections on our corporate profiles, instruct the reception desk to forward all hostile calls to a silent voicemail box. We do not engage." The director hesitated clearly, terrified by the unconventional strategy, but my unwavering authority forced her compliance. She nodded slowly and retreated from the office to execute the blackout protocols. I sat alone in the quiet suite listening to the distant muffled ringing of the reception phones. The public humiliation was a bitter pill to swallow. I was being crucified by a mob of strangers defending a woman who was actively participating in a multi-million-dollar fraud ring. Chloe thought my silence was proof of my defeat. She assumed my lack of a public defense meant her smear campaign had successfully paralyzed me. She reveled in the soaring view counts, believing she had permanently asserted her dominance. She did not realize that my silence was not a surrender. It was a tactical retreat. I was willingly absorbing the temporary damage to my reputation to ensure the federal trap remained perfectly concealed. I was trading a few days of social media infamy for the ultimate satisfaction of watching her entire fraudulent existence collapse under the crushing weight of a federal indictment. The storm raged outside my office walls, but I remained anchored. The $5 million wire transfer was still 14 days away. I just had to survive the noise until the real execution began. The ensuing 48 hours tested the very limits of my professional restraint. The corporate board of my commercial real estate firm convened an emergency meeting. 7 senior executives sat around the long mahogany table, their faces tight with mounting anxiety. The digital smear campaign Chloe initiated had breached the containment of social media gossip and was actively threatening our operational stability. A major municipal contractor had temporarily halted a pending negotiation, citing concerns over the predatory business practices alleged in the viral video. The board members demanded immediate aggressive retaliation. They presented drafted press releases aggressively denying the extortion claims and proposed leaking the zeroed-out venue contract to friendly media contacts to clear my name. I sat at the head of the table listening to their frantic strategies. I did not review their drafted statements. I projected the cold, unyielding authority that had built this firm. We release nothing I commanded, silencing the chaotic boardroom. We maintain an absolute communications blackout. No interviews, no social media rebuttals, and no off-the-record leaks. The vice president of operations leaned forward, his brow furrowed in deep frustration. "Victoria, the optics are disastrous. Silence implies guilt in the court of public opinion. We are actively bleeding market goodwill because you refuse to defend yourself against a baseless attack." "I understand the temporary optics," I replied, my voice sharp and decisive. "But this firm does not make tactical decisions based on the emotional volatility of an internet mob. The woman generating this noise is currently entangled in a highly sensitive situation. If we engage her publicly, we elevate her platform and legitimize a baseless distraction. We hold the line. The crisis will burn itself out when the actual truth is revealed. I could not disclose the impending federal investigation to the board. Any leak regarding the Department of Justice tracking Julian accounts would trigger a catastrophic panic, destroying the trap Marcus had so carefully constructed. I had to absorb their collective doubt and frustration, absorbing the damage to protect the larger objective. I dismissed the board, leaving them dissatisfied but compliant. I returned to my office, isolating myself from the escalating noise. My forced silence produced the exact psychological effect I anticipated on my former best friend. Chloe interpreted my lack of a public defense as a massive personal victory. She believed she had successfully bullied a corporate executive into submission, demonstrating her supreme social dominance. Emboldened by the millions of views and the thousands of supportive comments validating her manufactured victimhood, her behavior escalated from petty grievances to rampant, unchecked narcissism. She began broadcasting her life relentlessly. Her social media channels transformed into a constant live feed of unearned luxury. She filmed herself touring the grounds of the Monarch Estate, boasting about her brilliant negotiation skills securing the venue. She streamed unboxing videos of expensive designer gifts Julian had supposedly purchased to soothe her wedding anxiety, completely oblivious to the fact that the gifts were funded by stolen pension money. I monitored her broadcasts from a secure burner account. I did not watch for masochistic entertainment. I watched with the precise, analytical focus of an auditor scanning a ledger for anomalies. Arrogance invariably breeds carelessness. When a person believes they are untouchable, they stop checking their blind spots. On Thursday evening, just 10 days before the scheduled wedding, Chloe initiated a live broadcast from the expansive living room of Julian Luxury Penthouse. She was wearing a silk robe, holding a glass of champagne, performing for an audience of 50,000 active viewers. The title of the stream read, Exclusive Wedding Dress Reveal. I watched the broadcast on a secondary monitor, my primary screen displaying complex routing algorithms. Chloe rambled for several minutes about the stress of event planning and the importance of surrounding oneself with positive energy, taking several thinly veiled jabs at my character. She stood up, twirling in front of a full-length mirror to display a heavily beaded designer gown. She moved erratically, caught up in the performative joy of the moment. She grabbed her phone off the tripod, intending to give her audience a closer look at the intricate lacework on the bodice. As she swept the camera across the living room, the lens briefly captured the heavy oak dining table situated in the background. Julian was sitting there wearing a headset, deeply engrossed in a video conference. His laptop was open, the screen glaring brightly in the dimly lit room. Chloe laughed loudly, panning the camera back toward herself, completely ignoring her fiancé. She chattered about the designer fitting schedule and the imported silk, but my attention was entirely hijacked by the background detail. I hit the record button on my secure terminal, capturing the live feed directly to my encrypted hard drive. I paused the playback, rewinding the footage to the exact fraction of a second the camera swept past Julian workspace. I expanded the video window, maximizing the resolution. The image of the laptop screen was blurred, distorted by the rapid movement of Chloe's camera and the compressed quality of the live stream. A standard viewer would see nothing but a glowing rectangle. But I am not a standard viewer. I am a data architect trained to extract hidden variables from corrupted systems. I launched a proprietary image enhancement software I developed for analyzing degraded architectural blueprints. I isolated the specific frames containing the laptop screen, applying aggressive sharpening filters and contrast adjustments to strip away the digital noise. The software churned for several tense minutes, processing the heavily pixelated data. The blurred, glowing rectangle slowly snapped into sharp, defined focus. Julian was not looking at a standard email client or a cryptocurrency trading dashboard. He was logged into an underground peer-to-peer payment gateway interface, characterized by stark command line text rather than user-friendly graphics. I stared at the enhanced image, my heart pounding a steady rhythmic drum against my ribs. Displayed clearly on the upper left corner of his screen was a complex alphanumeric string. It was 32 characters long, a random sequence of numbers and letters that held absolutely zero meaning to an untrained eye. I recognized the architecture of the string instantly. It was a cryptographic key. In the realm of international money laundering, standard bank routing numbers are far too dangerous. When moving illicit capital across borders, syndicates utilize encrypted payment gateways that require specific cryptographic keys to authenticate and receive anonymous offshore wire transfers. Julian was actively monitoring the digital portal, waiting for the $5 million wire transfer from the Cayman Islands. He had left the secure interface open while taking a video call, completely underestimating the surveillance capabilities of the device his fiancée was waving around the room. Chloe, in her desperate need to broadcast her fake wealth to strangers, had inadvertently filmed the exact digital master key required to access her husband's money laundering server. The toxic best friend had just handed me the final weapon needed to destroy their entire criminal enterprise. I copied the 32-character cryptographic key, typing it meticulously into a secure text document. My hands remained perfectly steady, betraying none of the adrenaline flooding my system. I picked up my secure phone and dialed Marcus. The federal prosecutor answered immediately, the background noise of the SEC Enforcement Division humming through the line. "I have the portal key," I stated, skipping any preamble. Chloe broadcasted his open terminal during a live stream. I isolated the cryptographic string required to authenticate the inbound offshore wire. Marcus let out a sharp, surprised breath. "You extracted a 32-character key from a social media live stream. That is incredibly reckless on his part. He is leaving secure gateways open on an unsecured residential network." "Arrogance breeds fatal errors," Marcus first replied, staring at the alphanumeric string glowing on my monitor. "If we possess the receiving key, we no longer have to wait for his bank to process the transaction. We can intercept the digital handshake the moment the Cayman server attempts to initiate the transfer." Marcus fell silent, his legal mind processing the tactical advantage. If we intercept the handshake, we can bypass his domestic holding account entirely. We can reroute the $5 million directly into a Department of Justice escrow evidence vault before the capital ever touches his ledger. He will see the transfer initiate on his end, but the funds will vanish into federal custody, and he will have absolutely no idea who took it. I added a cold, predatory smile forming on my lips. He will panic. He will assume the cartel burned him or the routing failed. He will desperately try to cover his tracks, making careless mistakes right before the wedding. I will secure the emergency federal rerouting authorization tonight. Marcus confirmed, his voice carrying the lethal authority of an executioner. "Send me the cryptographic key. The trap is officially armed, Victoria." I terminated the call and transmitted the encrypted data packet to Marcus' secure federal server. I leaned back in my leather executive chair, looking out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the sprawling Manhattan skyline. The public was currently tearing my reputation apart, fueled by the tears of a manipulative bride. My board of directors was panicking over lost contracts. Julian believed he was days away from securing $5 million in laundered cartel money to solidify his fake empire. They all thought they understood the rules of the game being played. They had no idea I had just rewritten the underlying code. The silence was over. It was time to push the dominoes. The evening before the wedding arrived, carrying a heavy, oppressive humidity that clung to the Manhattan streets. I stood outside the exclusive French restaurant chosen for the rehearsal dinner, adjusting the lapels of my tailored charcoal blazer. The invitation had been mandatory, delivered via a passive-aggressive text message from Chloe's mother, stating my absence would be viewed as a public admission of guilt regarding the viral video scandal. I walked through the brass double doors, projecting the image of a woman thoroughly defeated by public pressure. I kept my gaze slightly lowered, offering tight, polite smiles to the gathering relatives and the fake Instagram bridesmaids. They whispered behind my back, their eyes tracking my every movement, fueled by the narrative Chloe had so successfully weaponized against me. I found a quiet corner near the heavy velvet drapes, nursing a glass of sparkling water. I observed the room. Julian was holding court near the main bar, laughing loudly with a group of older investors. He projected the confident aura of a self-made titan, completely oblivious to the federal trap waiting to snap shut tomorrow morning. Chloe fluttered around him, wearing a stunning white silk cocktail dress, soaking up the admiration of her sycophants. 10 minutes into the event, Julian caught my eye across the crowded room. He did not smile. He gave a sharp, almost imperceptible jerk of his head toward the back hallway, indicating a private meeting. He turned and walked away, Chloe following closely behind him like a loyal shadow. I took a slow, steadying breath. I reached up and subtly adjusted the vintage diamond brooch pinned to the lapel of my blazer. The brooch was an heirloom, masking a sophisticated digital audio recorder that transmitted directly to a secure cloud server. I activated the device and followed them down the dim corridor. Julian pushed open the heavy oak door to a private VIP dining room. The space was soundproofed, intended for discreet, high-level business negotiations. A single mahogany table dominated the center of the room, illuminated by a low, hanging crystal chandelier. I stepped inside, and Julian immediately pulled the door shut, locking the deadbolt with a loud definitive click. The ambient noise of the rehearsal dinner vanished completely, leaving a suffocating, heavy silence. Chloe stood near the far wall, crossing her arms defensively over her silk dress. Her expression was a chilling mixture of unearned superiority and malicious anticipation. Julian walked over to the mahogany table. He reached inside his tailored jacket and extracted a thick, legally bound document, tossing it onto the polished wood. "Have a seat, Victoria." Julian commanded, his voice stripped of the charming facade he wore in the main dining room. "We have some outstanding business to conclude before tomorrow." I walked slowly toward the table, maintaining my performance of nervous hesitation. I glanced at Chloe, but she simply offered a cold, mocking smile. I pulled out a heavy leather chair and sat down. "What is this, Julian?" I asked, keeping my voice pitched to convey uncertainty. "I already waived the venue rental fees. I covered the catering deposit. What more do you need?" Julian placed his hands flat on the table, leaning his weight forward to intimidate me physically. He looked down at the document, then locked his dark eyes onto mine. "You waived the rental fees because you were trying to salvage your public image," Julian stated, his tone dripping with profound arrogance. "But the damage you caused Chloe is extensive. Her viral video generated massive engagement, but it also highlighted your predatory business practices. The public hates you, Victoria. Your commercial real estate firm is bleeding goodwill." I let my hands tremble slightly, resting them on my lap out of his line of sight. "The public relations fallout has been challenging," I admitted, lowering my gaze to sell the vulnerability. "But my board is managing the crisis." "Your board is panicking," Julian corrected sharply. "I have contacts in the financial district. I know 2 of your major municipal contractors paused their negotiations this week. Your company relies on community trust to secure zoning permits. If Chloe posts a follow-up video tomorrow morning explicitly detailing how you attempted to extort us, your stock valuation will plummet. You will face a boycott you cannot survive." He was laying out a textbook extortion plot. He was explicitly threatening to destroy my commercial enterprise using a fabricated social media campaign to extract a financial concession. Every single word was actively recording through the diamond brooch on my lapel. "What do you want?" I whispered, injecting a note of desperate panic into my voice. Chloe stepped away from the wall, moving closer to the table. She looked down at me, her eyes gleaming with toxic satisfaction. "We do not want a temporary rental, Victoria," Chloe said, her voice sickly sweet. "The Monarch Estate is the perfect flagship property. We want you to sign the deed over to Julian Holding Company. We want the entire property transferred as a formal wedding gift." I gasped, allowing my eyes to widen in manufactured horror. "You want me to give you a $20 million historical property? You are insane. The board of directors would never approve a unilateral asset transfer of that magnitude." Julian slammed his hand against the mahogany table, the sudden violence designed to break my resistance. "You are the majority shareholder and the sole managing director," he barked, leaning closer. "You possess the executive authority to execute a quick claim deed." He tapped a manicured finger aggressively against the document resting on the table. "This paperwork legally transfers the ownership of the Monarch Estate to my primary limited liability company," Julian explained, outlining the mechanics of his theft. "It is structured as a non-taxable corporate gift. You sign this right now, and Chloe will post a retraction video tomorrow morning. She will tell her millions of followers that there was a massive misunderstanding and that you are actually a generous, supportive friend. Your public image is instantly restored, and your municipal contracts are saved." He paused, letting the threat hang heavy in the quiet VIP room. "If you refuse to sign—" Julian continued, his voice dropping to a lethal, menacing whisper. "Chloe goes live tomorrow at dawn. We destroy your reputation permanently. Your investors pull their capital, and your firm goes bankrupt by the end of the quarter. The choice is yours, Victoria. Lose one property or lose your entire empire. It was a flawless execution of organized blackmail. They had weaponized my friendship, manipulated the public, and cornered me in a locked room to steal a $20 million asset. They believed they held absolute leverage. They thought my fear of public humiliation and corporate ruin would force my compliance. They had no idea they were actively confessing to a federal felony in front of a live microphone. I looked at Chloe, searching her face for any lingering trace of the woman I had known for a decade. There was nothing left but ravenous greed and a desperate need to validate her fraudulent lifestyle. "Chloe," I pleaded, allowing a tear to well up in my eye. "Please do not do this. We have been friends for 10 years. You know I built this company from nothing. You cannot steal my property." Chloe let out a short, harsh laugh, crossing her arms tighter. "You should have thought about our friendship before you tried to ruin my wedding aesthetic, Victoria. You always thought you were smarter than everyone else because you sat in an office making deals. Now you need to be smart enough to know when you are beaten. Just sign the paper and be grateful we are offering you a way out." I lowered my head, staring at the thick legal document on the table. I let out a ragged, defeated sigh, acting like a woman whose spirit had finally shattered under the immense pressure. I reached out with a trembling hand and picked up the heavy silver pen resting next to the paperwork. Julian smiled, a wide, victorious grin spreading across his face. He believed he had just successfully extorted a real estate mogul. He thought he had secured a $20 million asset to legitimize his failing Ponzi scheme. I pulled the document closer, flipping to the final page where the signature lines were indicated. I gripped the silver pen tightly. When executing high-stakes corporate contracts, executives are trained to protect themselves against coercion. My legal team had previously registered a highly specific duress signature with the state authorities. It is a distinct, purposefully flawed version of my normal signature, used exclusively when signing documents under physical threat or extortion. I deliberately altered the slant of the first letter and completely disconnected the flowing loop of my last name. The subtle changes would be invisible to an amateur like Julian, but a forensic handwriting expert would instantly identify the signature as legally invalid and executed under severe duress. I dragged the pen across the dotted line, completing the flawed signature. I slid the document back across the mahogany table. Julian snatched the paperwork, his eyes hungrily scanning the ink. He verified the signature, his chest puffing out with arrogant triumph. He had secured the prize. "Excellent," Julian declared, folding the document and sliding it securely into the interior pocket of his tailored jacket. "You made the right choice, Victoria. Chloe will post the retraction video after the ceremony tomorrow. We expect to see you smiling in the back row. Do not cause any disruptions." He unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the heavy oak door open, the loud, ambient noise of the rehearsal dinner flooding back into the quiet room. He gestured for me to leave. I stood up, smoothing the wrinkles from my charcoal blazer. I did not wipe the manufactured tear from my cheek. I walked past them, keeping my head lowered, projecting the image of a completely broken woman. "Enjoy your evening, Julian," I murmured, my voice weak and defeated. "I will see you tomorrow." I walked out of the VIP room and headed straight for the exit, bypassing the crowded dining area entirely. I stepped out into the humid Manhattan night air, feeling a profound sense of absolute liberation. The heavy, suffocating act was officially over. I reached up and gently tapped the vintage diamond brooch pinned to my lapel, stopping the recording. I pulled my phone from my pocket, opening the secure application to verify the audio file had successfully transmitted to Marcus servers. The green confirmation checkmark illuminated the screen. Julian and Chloe believed they had just stolen a $20 million estate. They thought their extortion plot had saved their fraudulent empire. They had absolutely no idea that the signature was legally worthless and that their recorded confession had just guaranteed them decades in a federal penitentiary. The trap was fully armed. The digital keys were secured. The audio evidence was locked in a federal vault. Tomorrow morning, Julian was expecting a $5 million offshore wire transfer to land in his account. He was expecting to walk down the aisle a conquering king. He was going to wake up to a reality so devastating he would not even know how to breathe. The long-calculated silence was finally coming to an end. It was time to burn the house down. The morning of the wedding dawned with a brilliant, cloudless sky. Sunlight poured over the sprawling, manicured lawns of the Monarch Estate, illuminating the imported white roses cascading down the grand stone staircases. It was a picturesque setting designed for high society magazines, a flawless visual execution of the old money aesthetic Chloe so desperately craved. I arrived at the venue precisely 3 hours before the ceremony was scheduled to begin. I bypassed the main entrance, opting for a discreet service access gate. I was not there to sip mimosas or marvel at the floral arrangements. I was there to monitor the final activation of the federal trap. My phone buzzed with a sharp notification as I walked across the cobblestone courtyard. It was a text from Harper, the newly appointed maid of honor. "Chloe says you are strictly forbidden from entering the bridal suite." The message read, dripping with manufactured authority. "She does not want your negative energy ruining her preparation time. Your assigned seat is in the very last row on the far left side, next to the emergency exit doors. Please do not attempt to mingle with the venture capitalists during the cocktail hour." I read the text and felt a profound sense of satisfaction. Chloe believed her petty seating assignment was the ultimate punishment, a public humiliation designed to assert her dominance. She wanted me banished to the back row, treating me like a pariah to validate her fragile ego. She had absolutely no idea that positioning me near the exit doors granted me the perfect, unobstructed vantage point to execute my final commands. I typed a simple, agreeable response. "Understood. I will remain in my designated seat." I slipped the phone back into my pocket and altered my path. I did not walk toward the seating area. I moved silently around the perimeter of the estate, heading toward a dense grove of ancient oak trees bordering the property line. Hidden completely out of sight beneath the heavy canopy of branches sat a matte black mobile command vehicle. It belonged to the private corporate security firm my real estate company kept on permanent retainer. The discreet, unmarked van served as my temporary tactical headquarters. I knocked twice on the heavy reinforced side door. The locks disengaged with a mechanical clack, and I stepped up into the climate-controlled interior. The space was lined with high-definition monitors displaying live security feeds from every camera mounted across the Monarch Estate. I sat down in the leather swivel chair, pulling my encrypted laptop from my briefcase. I established a secure encrypted connection, bypassing the local network entirely. "Marcus," I spoke clearly into my headset. "Are you in position?" The federal prosecutor voice crackled through the earpiece, resonating with a calm, lethal readiness. "I am stationed in a tactical SUV exactly 2 miles east of the estate perimeter, Victoria. The Department of Justice Anti-Money Laundering Task Force is fully briefed and awaiting my signal. We have 20 armed agents standing by. The trap is primed." I pulled up the primary diagnostic interface on my laptop. The screen displayed a complex routing matrix directly linking to the underground payment gateway Julian utilized for his illicit transactions. I reviewed the cryptographic key we extracted from Chloe's careless live stream. The 32-character alphanumeric string glowed brightly on the monitor. It was the master key required to authenticate the incoming $5 million offshore wire transfer from the Cayman Islands. Julian believed his server was a fortress. He was utterly convinced the encrypted handshake protocol would process the illegal funds, securely masking the transaction from domestic banking regulators. He was incredibly wrong. During the night, I had engineered a highly specialized bypass script, a digital siphon designed to intercept the transaction, the exact millisecond the capital hit American servers. The script was coiled around Julian cryptographic key, acting as an invisible parasite. I initiated the monitoring sequence. A red indicator light began flashing rhythmically on my screen, signaling the system was actively scanning the global financial network for the specific inbound transfer. "We wait," I told Marcus, leaning back in the chair. "The offshore wire is scheduled to execute momentarily." I switched my attention to the live security feeds displaying the interior of the Monarch Estate. Camera 4 offered a crystal-clear view of the groom suite. Julian was standing in front of a full-length mirror adjusting the collar of his bespoke tuxedo. He looked incredibly calm, projecting the aura of a man who possessed zero liabilities. He checked his expensive watch, a smug, satisfied grin spreading across his face. He was waiting for the digital notification. He was waiting for his phone to ping with the confirmation that $5 million in laundered cartel money had safely landed in his domestic account, securing his fraudulent empire and proving his utter invincibility. The red indicator light on my monitor suddenly shifted to a solid, burning amber. The system detected an incoming anomaly from an overseas routing hub. Incoming transmission. Marcus Y announced, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. The Cayman server is initiating the digital handshake. The data packets flooded the screen, rushing toward Julian Payment Gateway. The offshore entity transmitted the encrypted capital, seeking the matching 32-character key to finalize the deposit. Julian phone resting on the velvet ottoman in the groom suite lit up with a preliminary banking alert. I watched him grab the device, his eyes widening with greedy anticipation as he opened his secure financial application. The offshore capital crashed into the domestic server. "Execute bypass," I commanded. Slamming my finger down onto the return key, my custom script deployed instantaneously, intercepting the $5 million wire transfer the exact millisecond it authenticated against Julian cryptographic key. The digital siphon violently rerouted the massive sum of illicit capital, pulling it away from Julian Primary Holding Company. The money shot through a secure, encrypted tunnel, bypassing the domestic banking architecture entirely. "Target acquired," Marcus reported, his voice thick with adrenaline. "The funds are actively diverting." I watched the progress bar on my monitor fill with breathtaking speed. The $5 million slammed securely into the Department of Justice escrow vault, a heavily fortified federal account designed exclusively for holding seized illicit assets. The capital was permanently locked down, completely inaccessible to Julian or his offshore cartel investors. The money was gone. But my script contained one final magnificent piece of psychological warfare. I had programmed the bypass script to return a fabricated confirmation ping back to Julian original terminal. On the security feed, I watched Julian stare intently at his smartphone screen. The application processed the fake authentication signal. A bright green notification banner flashed across his device, indicating a successful deposit. The interface falsely displayed a $5 million increase in his available balance. Julian let out a loud, triumphant bark of laughter, pumping his fist in the air. He turned to his groomsmen, holding his phone up to display the fabricated balance. He was celebrating a massive victory, completely unaware that he was staring at a digital mirage. He believed he was a multi-millionaire. He had absolutely no idea he was entirely bankrupt and facing decades in federal prison. "Transaction completed," Marcus Y confirmed, logging out of the secure terminal and closing my laptop. "The capital is secured in federal custody. The bait was swallowed whole." "Copy that," Victoria Marcus replied, the sound of heavy tactical gear shifting in the background. "The task force is mobilizing. We are holding our perimeter. Give us the signal when the target is fully exposed." I disconnected the headset and packed my equipment into my briefcase. The technical execution was flawless. The financial snare had snapped shut, severing Julian lifeline without raising a single alarm. I stepped out of the mobile command vehicle and into the bright morning sunlight. The air smelled of blooming roses and impending devastation. The classical music from the string quartet drifted across the lawn, signaling the guests to take their seats. I walked toward the grand ballroom, ensuring my posture was perfectly relaxed. I entered the venue, keeping my head slightly lowered, playing the role of the humiliated, banished friend. I bypassed the eager, wealthy investors and the smug bridesmaids, taking my assigned seat in the very last row next to the heavy oak exit doors. The stage was set. The audience was seated. The groom believed he was a king. It was time for the final performance to begin. The grand ballroom of the Monarch Estate felt less like a sanctuary and more like a carefully constructed theater. Vaulted ceilings painted with Renaissance-style frescoes soared above the gathered crowd. Heavy crystal chandeliers cast a warm, forgiving glow over the 300 guests seated in gilded wooden chairs. The air was thick with the scent of imported white lilies and the subtle metallic tang of expensive perfume. I sat motionless in the very last row, my back pressed against the cool, polished wood of the exit door frame. A heavy gray wool overcoat draped loosely over my shoulders, completely obscuring the garments beneath. To the guests seated nearby, I appeared as a dull gray shadow, a sad, marginalized figure, graciously tolerating my public banishment. I watched the spectacle unfold with the clinical detachment of an auditor reviewing a fraudulent ledger. The string quartet, positioned near the altar, transitioned smoothly into a swelling, triumphant melody. The bridal procession began. Harper and Mia led the march, moving with slow, practiced elegance. They wore matching pale blush gowns, their hair styled in cascading waves. They offered soft, manufactured smiles to the audience, projecting the image of devoted, loyal friends. The attendees whispered admiringly, pointing out their social media popularity. The guests had no idea these women were not bridesmaids. They were highly compensated corporate props paid $10,000 a month from stolen pension funds to act as a fake board of directors. They were walking down the aisle actively participating in an elaborate financial cover-up wrapping a criminal enterprise in tulle and lace. My gaze shifted to the front rows. The seating chart Chloe had obsessed over was a masterclass in predatory targeting. Positioned in the prime viewing area were dozens of older, affluent individuals. I recognized several faces from the banking profiles I had analyzed. These were retired civil servants, former school teachers, and local business owners who had entrusted their life savings to Julian cryptocurrency fund. They sat proudly in their formal attire, applauding softly, their eyes shining with genuine admiration for the young, successful groom. They believed the lavish wedding was undeniable proof of Julian financial genius. They honestly thought their investments were yielding massive exponential returns, safely securing their twilight years. They had absolutely no idea that their entire retirement portfolios had been liquidated to pay for the crystal chandeliers, the imported lilies, and the vintage champagne chilling in the kitchen. They were actively applauding the theft of their own futures. Julian stood at the altar waiting for his bride. He was the absolute focal point of the room. He wore a custom-tailored tuxedo that fit his broad shoulders flawlessly. His posture was rigid, projecting the supreme, untouchable confidence of a man who believed he had just conquered the world. He occasionally checked the breast pocket of his jacket, where his smartphone was securely tucked away. He was undoubtedly thinking about the fake $5 million balance my bypass script had successfully projected onto his screen just 20 minutes prior. He truly believed he was holding a fortune in laundered cartel money, granting him limitless power. He stood there a paper king, reigning over a kingdom built on shifting sand. The heavy oak doors at the back of the ballroom swung open, drawing a collective gasp from the audience. Chloe appeared framed in the entryway, bathed in a dramatic cascade of natural light. The $50,000 designer gown was breathtaking, featuring intricate hand-sewn beadwork and a train that stretched several yards behind her. She gripped her father arm, her face radiating pure, unadulterated triumph. She walked down the long, velvet runner, soaking in the admiring stares of the venture capitalists and wealthy investors. Her smile was radiant, devoid of any guilt or hesitation. In her mind, she had achieved absolute victory. She had secured a billionaire husband, acquired massive wealth, and successfully crushed the best friend who dared to challenge her aesthetic vision. She walked past my row without even glancing in my direction, entirely dismissing my existence. She believed I was broken, humiliated, and powerless. She reached the altar, placing her hand delicately into Julian's waiting palm. He offered her a charming, practiced smile, completely hiding the monstrous reality of their partnership. They turned to face the officiant, an older, distinguished man, hired specifically for his commanding, articulate voice. The ceremony proceeded with traditional elegance. The officiant spoke eloquently about the foundations of a strong marriage, highlighting trust, honesty, and unwavering loyalty. The sheer hypocrisy of the words spoken in front of a fraudulent hedge fund manager and a blackmailing bride was almost physically nauseating. I remained seated, my breathing slow and regulated. I was waiting for the precise procedural moment required to execute the final maneuver. The officiant paused, letting the weight of his previous statements settle over the quiet ballroom. He adjusted his glasses, looking out across the sea of expectant faces. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to witness the union of Julian and Chloe. The officiant began, his voice echoing clearly through the high-end surround sound speakers. Marriage is a sacred bond built on truth and transparency. Therefore, if anyone present knows any reason why these two should not be joined in holy matrimony, speak now or forever hold your peace." The traditional phrase hung heavy in the silent room. It is a ceremonial formality, an outdated tradition that rarely invites any actual response. The guests shifted comfortably in their chairs, expecting the officiant to immediately continue with the exchange of vows. Julian offered Chloe a reassuring, confident nod, assuming the hurdle was cleared. The silence stretched for 3 agonizing seconds. I did not hesitate. I stood up. The movement was deliberate and sharp, slicing through the quiet stillness of the back row. The heavy gray wool overcoat that had served as my camouflage slipped off my shoulders, pooling silently onto the velvet chair. I stepped fully into the aisle. I was not wearing a subdued, neutral outfit. I had specifically chosen a bespoke crimson silk suit, tailored with aggressive, razor-sharp lines. It was a vibrant, violent red that demanded absolute, immediate attention. In a sea of muted pastels and conservative gray suits, I was a blazing, undeniable fire. The guest seated in the row, immediately in front of me, turned around, a polite, confused smile freezing on his face. The woman next to him gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. The disruption rippled rapidly forward, like a physical wave traveling through the audience. Heads turned, whispers erupted. The polite, sophisticated decorum of the luxury event instantly fractured. I did not raise my hand. I did not shout. I simply stood in the center of the aisle, radiating cold, lethal authority. I stared directly at the altar-locking eyes with the man who believed he had successfully laundered $5 million through my property. Julian's confident smile completely evaporated. His jaw slackened, his posture stiffening in sudden, unexpected alarm. He recognized the crimson suit. He recognized the cold, calculating stare of the woman he had attempted to extort just 24 hours ago. He realized the quiet, defeated friend had vanished completely, replaced by a corporate predator. Chloe whipped her head around the heavy, beaded veil, pulling awkwardly against her elaborate hairstyle. Her eyes widened in sheer disbelief, unable to comprehend why the banished guest was standing up, ruining her perfect photographic moment. The trap was fully armed. The audience was captivated. The execution was ready to begin. The sharp staccato click of my heels against the marble floor echoed through the cavernous ballroom. I walked down the center aisle, my pace measured and unrelenting. The sea of muted pastel guests parted instinctively, pulling away from the crimson-suited woman marching toward the altar. Chloe's face contorted, shedding the delicate bridal facade. The serene smile was replaced by a snarl of panicked rage. "Victoria, what are you doing?" she shrieked, her voice cracking over the ambient silence. "Security! Someone get her out of here. She is ruining my wedding." 2 private security guards stationed near the front rows stepped forward, their hands reaching out to intercept me. I did not break my stride. I raised a single hand, leveling a cold, commanding stare at the guards. "I am the sole owner of this estate," I stated, my voice carrying effortless authority. "Stand down, or you are fired." The guards froze, exchanging uncertain glances. They recognized the developer who signed their paychecks. They stepped back, melting into the crowd. I reached the altar, ascending the 3 wooden steps with deliberate grace. The officiant stepped backward, clutching his binder, looking alarmed by the sudden disruption. I reached out and firmly took the microphone from his hand. I turned to face the 300 guests. The elite venture capitalists, the social media influencers, and the elderly investors stared back at me in profound confusion. "I do not object to this marriage," I announced. My voice amplified through the high-end surround sound speakers, slicing through the tension. "You two are perfectly suited for each other." Chloe crossed her arms, her heavy beaded veil shuddering. "Then sit down and shut up, Victoria. You are making a fool of yourself. You are just bitter because you do not belong in this circle." I ignored her entirely, keeping my gaze fixed on the audience. "But I do object." I continued, maintaining a flat clinical tone to my property being used as a staging ground for a massive international money laundering operation. The ballroom erupted into a chaotic symphony of gasps and frantic whispers. The venture capitalists in the front rows stiffened their postures, turning to look at Julian. The older investors murmured among themselves, confusion mingling with sudden sharp alarm. Julian stepped forward, his face a mask of manufactured calm. He forced a condescending laugh, waving his hand dismissively toward the crowd. "Please excuse my fiancée," former friend Julian projected his voice, attempting to reclaim the narrative. "She has been struggling with some severe emotional instability lately. The jealousy over our success has clearly triggered a psychological break. She is making baseless delusional accusations." He moved closer, reaching out to grab the microphone from my hand. I stepped deftly out of his reach. "Delusional," I echoed, raising an eyebrow. "I am a commercial real estate developer, Julian. I deal in hard assets and verified ledgers. I do not deal in delusions." Julian smirked, his chest puffing out with arrogant triumph. He believed his offshore capital had successfully landed. He thought he possessed the ultimate financial leverage. "You deal in small-time rentals," Victoria Julian mocked, ensuring the prominent investors heard his boast. "You are trying to sabotage this event because you are broke and desperate. But your little stunt changes nothing. My global expansion fund just secured a $5 million capital injection this morning. The wire cleared my accounts 20 minutes ago. I have enough liquidity to buy this entire estate in cash and bulldoze it just for fun. Now get off my stage before I have you arrested for trespassing." He stood there practically vibrating with unearned power. He was flaunting the stolen cartel money as proof of his superiority, entirely unaware that he was bragging about a phantom fortune. I offered him a slow, terrifying smile. "You should always verify the routing numbers before you celebrate, Julian," I said softly. I reached into the pocket of my crimson blazer and retrieved a small black remote control. I held it up, pointing it directly at the massive floral backdrop positioned behind the altar. I pressed the activation button. The motorized rigging hummed to life. The heavy curtain of imported white roses dropped instantly, pooling onto the floor in a chaotic heap. Concealed behind the floral arrangement was a massive high-definition LED screen typically utilized for displaying romantic video montages during the reception. The screen flared to life, casting a stark, brilliant light across the darkened ballroom. There were no childhood photographs. There was no romantic music. The screen displayed a live direct feed from Julian Primary Cryptocurrency Payment Gateway. Julian turned around, his arrogant smirk dissolving the second he recognized the proprietary interface of his own secure server. He stared at the screen, his brain desperately trying to process how I had bypassed his encryption. The interface did not display his fabricated $5 million balance. It displayed a flashing, glaring red warning banner that dominated the entire screen. "Account frozen." Julian stumbled backward, his polished dress shoes slipping slightly on the marble stage. He gasped for air, his hands flying to his pockets to retrieve his phone. He frantically opened his banking application, his thumbs flying across the glass screen. The crowd fell dead silent, watching the groom unravel in real time. Beneath the frozen account warning, a secondary block of text materialized on the massive LED display. The words were typed in stark, unyielding black font, bearing the undeniable digital signature of federal law enforcement. $5 million intercepted, funds diverted to Department of Justice, escrow evidence vault, operation status active. The silence shattered. The ballroom imploded. Julian dropped his phone. The device clattered against the wooden stage, sliding toward the edge. The color drained entirely from his face, leaving his skin a sickly, ashen gray. He stared at the screen, his mouth opening and closing without producing a single sound. The billionaire facade was completely pulverized. He realized the notification on his phone 20 minutes ago was a manufactured lie. He realized the $5 million he needed to appease his dangerous offshore investors had never touched his accounts. He had just publicly bragged about receiving illicit capital right before a screen announced the funds were sitting in a federal evidence vault. He was bankrupt, he was exposed, and he was standing in front of 300 witnesses who had just heard him confess to possessing the intercepted funds. Chloe shrieked, her hands tearing at her expensive veil. "What did you do?" she screamed, lunging toward me. "What is that screen?" "Julian, tell them it is a lie. Tell them you have the money." Julian could not speak. He backed away from her, his eyes darting frantically toward the exit doors, searching for an escape route that no longer existed. The trap was sprung, and the execution was proceeding flawlessly. Julian staggered backward, hitting the decorative wooden archway that had framed the altar. The structure wobbled, threatening to collapse under his weight. He was actively hyperventilating his hands, clutching his chest, as the reality of the federal interception crushed the oxygen from his lungs. The swaggering tech bro had vanished, leaving a terrified, exposed fraudster in his wake. I did not grant him a single moment to recover or formulate a lie. I tightened my grip on the remote control and pressed the advance button, initiating the next phase of the public autopsy. The massive LED screen shifted. The glaring red federal warning dissolved, replaced by crisp, high-resolution scans of Julian internal banking ledgers. The spreadsheets were heavily annotated with red arrows, drawing direct lines between deposits and illicit expenditures. I raised the microphone, my voice echoing over the escalating panic in the ballroom. "Let us look at the foundation of this empire," I announced, projecting the authority of a lead prosecutor. "Julian claims to manage an elite cryptocurrency hedge fund, but this ledger reveals the truth. There are no trading algorithms. There are no venture capital yields." I clicked the remote. The screen magnified a specific cluster of transactions. "This is a Ponzi scheme," I declared, pointing toward the massive monitor. "He is using fresh deposits to pay off earlier investors, creating a fabricated illusion of growth. And he is using the principal capital to fund his extravagant lifestyle." The crowd stared at the screen, trying to process the financial data. I needed to make the betrayal deeply personal. I needed the audience to understand exactly whose money they were watching burn. I shifted the focus to the front rows, where the elderly investors sat, their faces pale with growing apprehension. "Look at the screen," I commanded. "These are the routing numbers for the retirement portfolios Julian was managing." I matched these deposits directly to his outbound expenditures over the last 3 months. I clicked the remote again. The screen displayed a split view. On the left were the deposit records from the elderly clients. On the right were the corresponding vendor invoices for the wedding. "Your life savings," I said, looking directly at a horrified retired teacher sitting in the second row, "did not go into a high-yield growth fund. It went directly to the boutique that designed Chloe $50,000 wedding gown." I clicked again, showing another matched transaction. The pension funds from the Municipal Workers Union were liquidated to pay for the crystal chandeliers hanging above your heads and the vintage champagne you are currently drinking. The polite, shocked murmurs of the crowd instantly mutated into a deafening roar of genuine outrage. The realization that they were celebrating in a venue funded by stolen retirement money broke the constraints of high society decorum. Several of the older investors stood up, shouting furiously at Julian, demanding answers, demanding their money back. Julian covered his ears, sinking to his knees on the stage. He was broken, incapable of defending himself against the indisputable mathematical proof flashing on the screen. Chloe, however, clung desperately to her manufactured reality. She refused to accept that her fairy tale was a crime scene. "She is lying!" Chloe shrieked, pointing a trembling manicured finger at me. "Victoria is a jealous hacker. She fabricated those spreadsheets to ruin my wedding. My bridesmaids are on the board of directors. They audit the funds. Julian runs a legitimate company." I smiled, a cold, humorless expression. I was waiting for her to invoke the bridal party. I pressed the final button on the remote. The spreadsheets vanished. The screen faded to black, and the audio system kicked in. The crystal-clear, high-definition recording I had captured at the bridal shower echoed through the massive ballroom speakers. Harper's voice filled the room, dripping with irritation. "Did Julian process the retainer for this month yet? My lease in Tribeca is due on the 1st. Mia's voice followed, dripping with cynical amusement. "The wire hit my account yesterday. $10,000 right on schedule. We do absolutely nothing." The bridesmaid standing near the altar froze. Harper dropped her bouquet, the white roses scattering across the marble floor. Mia covered her face, turning away from the glaring stares of the audience. The recording continued, exposing the entire fraudulent corporate structure. Julian told us we just need to sit on the board of directors for his cryptocurrency fund for 6 months. He needed clean names without any prior SEC violations to pad his corporate prospectus before the big funding round next week. We sign a few digital DocuSigns, attend a couple of Zoom meetings on mute, and collect $10,000 a month. The audio file ended, leaving a heavy toxic silence in its wake. They are not a board of directors, I stated, my voice slicing through the tension. They are paid actors. Julian bribed Instagram influencers with stolen pension money to act as a fake compliance board, defrauding major institutional investors. The venture capitalists seated in the middle rows began pulling out their phones rapidly, texting their legal teams and compliance officers to pull any pending funding deals associated with Julian. They were watching a financial contagion spread, and they were aggressively severing ties to avoid the fallout. Chloe stared at the bridesmaids, her mouth hanging open. The aesthetic perfection she had curated was entirely built on bribery and fraud. Her vanity had blinded her to the criminal conspiracy operating right in front of her. But the final blow was not meant for Chloe. It was meant for the woman who had called me to threaten my career. I looked toward the front row where Barbara Chloe Mother sat perfectly rigid. She was gripping the armrests of her gilded chair, her face devoid of all color. A Barbara I called out, ensuring the entire room focused on her. "You called me 2 weeks ago. You told me you and your husband had taken out a second mortgage on your ancestral estate to pump capital into Julian Expansion Fund. You told me the returns would pay off the house by next year." I clicked the remote one last time. The screen illuminated with a series of bank transfers originating from Barbara personal accounts. "I tracked your equity transfer," I explained softly, delivering the most devastating news of her life. "Julian did not invest your money. The moment your funds hit his account, he wired the entire amount to a high-stakes offshore casino in Macau. He lost your entire second mortgage at the baccarat tables in less than 48 hours. Barbara let out a high-pitched, agonizing wail. She slumped forward, collapsing onto the marble floor. Her husband rushed to her side, his face a mask of shock and profound despair. They had mortgaged their legacy, their family home, to support a degenerate gambler operating a Ponzi scheme. They were facing immediate foreclosure and total bankruptcy. The illusion of the elite old money family was entirely stripped away, leaving nothing but a desperate, ruined shell. The ballroom descended into complete chaos. The elderly investors pushed past the velvet ropes charging the stage. They screamed at Julian, demanding their life savings. The fake bridesmaids attempted to flee the altar, pushing through the angry crowd, desperate to escape the venue before the authorities arrived. Chloe fell to her knees, her $50,000 gown pooling around her in a ruined heap. She sobbed hysterically, tearing at her hair, unable to comprehend the absolute destruction of her life. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with terror and rage. "You ruined everything," she screamed, her voice cracking. "You destroyed us." I looked down at the woman who had been my best friend. I felt no pity. I felt no remorse. I felt a cold, unyielding satisfaction. "I did not ruin anything, Chloe." I replied, my voice perfectly calm amid the surrounding chaos. "I simply provided the projector. You and Julian built the house of cards." I turned away from the weeping bride and the hyperventilating groom. The financial autopsy was complete, the crowd was demanding blood, and the sirens I heard wailing in the distance confirmed that the final executioners were arriving precisely on schedule. Chloe scrambled to her feet, the heavy silk of her ruined wedding gown twisting around her legs. Her face was contorted into a mask of pure feral desperation. She lunged across the altar, stepping over Julian, who remained curled on the floor in a state of catatonic shock. She grabbed the lapels of my crimson silk suit, her manicured fingernails digging sharply into my shoulders. "Victoria, you set me up," Chloe shrieked, her voice hoarse and raw. "You planned this entire spectacle. You manipulated those spreadsheets to make him look guilty because you were jealous. I did not know anything about the offshore accounts. I am entirely innocent. You have to tell them I am innocent." She shook me violently, attempting to physically force a confession that would absolve her of the monumental fraud collapsing around us. The wealthy investors surging toward the stage hesitated momentarily, captivated by the bride's desperate performance. She was actively trying to rewrite the narrative, casting herself as the tragic, oblivious victim of a vindictive friend and a deceitful husband. I did not push her away. I stood perfectly still, maintaining my unwavering posture. I looked directly into her frantic, tear-streaked eyes. "I did not manipulate anything, Chloe." I stated, my voice deadly calm, slicing through her hysteria. "I simply illuminated the dark corners you willfully ignored. You chose to fund your aesthetic with stolen retirement money. You do not get to play the victim when the bill finally arrives." Before she could scream another denial, a thunderous concussive boom echoed through the grand ballroom. The sound was so loud, it drowned out the angry shouts of the defrauded investors and the panicked murmurs of the venture capitalists. The massive double oak doors at the main entrance of the Monarch Estate were violently kicked open. The heavy wood slammed against the interior walls with a deafening crack, splintering the polished trim. The chaotic atmosphere of the wedding reception instantly evaporated, replaced by the rigid electrified tension of an active federal raid. A highly coordinated tactical team flooded into the venue. Over 24 heavily armed agents wearing dark Kevlar vests swarmed the ballroom. The bold yellow lettering of the FBI and SEC blazed across their tactical gear. They moved with terrifying synchronized precision, securing the perimeter and physically blocking every exit. "Federal agents! Nobody move!" A commanding voice roared, echoing off the vaulted ceilings. The elite guests froze. The angry investors stepped back, their righteous fury immediately subdued by the overwhelming presence of federal law enforcement. The string quartet players lowered their instruments, raising their hands in silent compliance. Striding through the center of the tactical formation was Marcus. The senior federal prosecutor wore a sharp navy suit, his gold badge clipped prominently to his belt. He bypassed the terrified guests, his dark eyes locked firmly on the altar. He projected the lethal, unyielding authority of an apex predator walking into a secured kill zone. Marcus stepped onto the marble stage. He did not look at me. He directed his absolute focus onto the man cowering on the floor. "Julian Hayes." Marcus announced, his baritone voice resonating with chilling clarity. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, international money laundering, and severe violations of the Securities Exchange Act." Julian snapped out of his catatonic state. The reality of the federal raid triggered a blind, frantic survival instinct. He scrambled backward across the polished marble, his expensive tuxedo slipping uselessly against the stone. He looked wildly toward the side service door, positioned behind the floral arrangements, hoping to escape the trap. He lunged toward the exit. He did not make it 3 steps. 2 massive tactical agents intercepted his path with brutal efficiency. The lead agent grabbed Julian by the collar, spinning him around and driving a heavy shoulder directly into his chest. The impact threw Julian off balance, sending him crashing hard onto the marble floor. The second agent dropped his knee firmly between Julian's shoulder blades, pinning him securely to the ground. Julian gasped for air, thrashing weakly against the immense weight of the federal officers. "Get off me!" Julian wheezed, struggling to lift his head. "I demand my lawyer. I am a licensed portfolio manager. You cannot do this." "You do not have a portfolio," Marcus corrected coldly, standing over him. As of 20 minutes ago, the Department of Justice executed a hard freeze on every single domestic and offshore account tied to your name. Your assets are seized. Your firm is liquidated. You are entirely bankrupt. The sharp metallic click of heavy steel handcuffs ratcheting tightly around Julian's wrists echoed across the silent ballroom. It was the definitive sound of his empire ending. The agents hauled him roughly to his feet, his arms pulled awkwardly behind his back. Chloe watched her billionaire husband being treated like a common criminal. The illusion of her untouchable high society life was permanently shattered. Panic completely overrode her rationality. She released her grip on my suit and threw herself toward Marcus. She collapsed onto her knees, grabbing the fabric of his trousers. "Please, you have to listen to me." Chloe sobbed, her tears ruining her expensive makeup. "I am his wife, but I did not know anything about his business. I thought he was a legitimate investor. I did not know he was stealing from my grandparents. I am a victim here. You cannot ruin my life because of his mistakes. Please, I swear, I am completely innocent." She was deploying her ultimate weapon, weaponizing her tears and pleading ignorance, hoping the federal prosecutor would view her as a tragic collateral casualty rather than a willing accomplice. She expected Marcus to gently step back and offer her the immunity she believed she deserved. Marcus looked down at the weeping bride. His expression remained entirely devoid of empathy. He reached into his suit jacket and retrieved his encrypted federal smartphone. "Ignorance is a valid legal defense," Ms. Hayes Marcus stated, his tone flat and uncompromising. "Extortion, however, is not." He tapped the screen of his device. He held the phone up, ensuring the speaker was directed toward the audience. The crisp, high-definition audio recording I had captured at the rehearsal dinner played loudly over the stunned silence of the ballroom. Julian's voice echoed from the phone, outlining the threat to destroy my company using fabricated environmental reports. Then Chloe's voice filled the room, sharp, arrogant, and undeniably malicious. "You should have thought about our friendship before you tried to ruin my wedding aesthetic, Victoria. You always thought you were smarter than everyone else because you sat in an office making deals. Now you need to be smart enough to know when you are beaten. Just sign the paper and be grateful we are offering you a way out." The recording ended with a sharp click. Chloe stopped crying. Her mouth hung open, her eyes wide with unadulterated horror as she recognized her own recorded confession. She looked at me, realizing the terrified, submissive woman in the VIP room had been a carefully constructed illusion. She realized I had recorded her committing a felony while she arrogantly believed she was untouchable. "You attempted to extort a $20 million commercial property to facilitate an international money laundering operation," Marcus explained, stepping away from her grasping hands. "You explicitly threatened a corporate entity to secure illicit funds. You are not a victim. You are a documented co-conspirator." Marcus signaled to a female FBI agent standing nearby. "Take her into custody." The agent stepped forward, grabbing Chloe roughly by the arm and hauling her off the floor. Chloe thrashed wildly, her $50,000 designer gown tearing as she struggled against the federal officer. "No!" Chloe shrieked, her voice cracking into a hysterical wail. "Victoria, tell them to stop. Tell them it was a joke. I am your best friend. You cannot let them do this to me." I looked at the woman who had banished me from her bridal party, who had tried to extort my property, and who had willingly funded her vanity with stolen retirement money. "You do not fit the aesthetic of my company, Chloe," I replied softly, ensuring my voice carried the exact cold dismissal she had used against me 2 weeks ago. "Enjoy your new wardrobe." The agent spun Chloe around, snapping the cold steel handcuffs securely over the delicate lace sleeves of her wedding dress. The visual contrast of the pristine bridal gown and the heavy federal restraints was a masterpiece of poetic justice. The agents marched Julian and Chloe down the center aisle of the ballroom. The wealthy investors and the betrayed family members watched in stunned silence as the bride and groom were paraded out of their own luxury reception in disgrace. The flashing red and blue lights of the federal vehicles waiting outside cast erratic, frantic shadows across the marble foyer. I remained standing on the stage, the crimson silk of my suit immaculate. The execution was complete. The fraudulent empire had been entirely eradicated, and I was the only one left standing holding the keys to the kingdom. The weeks following the tactical raid at the Monarch Estate played out across national television networks like a masterfully scripted financial thriller. The high society wedding crasher narrative morphed into a multi-agency federal indictment overnight. Julian faced the full weight of the United States justice system. Without his hidden Cayman Islands capital to fund a high-priced defense team, he was assigned a public defender who quickly advised him to take a plea deal. Julian refused, clinging to his delusion of intellectual superiority. He honestly believed he could charm a federal judge the same way he charmed vulnerable retirees. The trial was brief and surgical. Federal prosecutors presented the intercepted cryptographic keys, the fake vendor invoices, and the audio recordings of his fake board members. Marcus led the prosecution, dismantling every lie Julian attempted to introduce into the court record. Julian tried to claim he was a victim of offshore cartels, but the paper trail proved he was the sole architect of the Ponzi structure. The judge sentenced him to 28 years in a federal penitentiary without the possibility of parole. His Instagram models turned corporate accomplices Harper and Mia attempted to negotiate immunity by turning state evidence against him. The judge did not care for their influencer status. They each received 6 years for their roles in securities fraud and laundering investor capital. Chloe suffered the most poetic social destruction. The viral TikTok video she had posted to assassinate my character became the exact instrument of her public humiliation. Internet sleuths and major media outlets spliced her tearful manufactured victimhood right alongside the raw smartphone footage of her being shoved into the back of a federal transport vehicle. The image of the weeping bride, wearing a ruined $50,000 designer gown, smeared mascara staining her cheeks, while steel handcuffs locked her wrists together, broke engagement records across every digital platform. The comment sections that had once demanded my corporate boycott now mocked her relentless vanity. She faced trial for extortion and accessory to international money laundering based on the audio captured by my diamond brooch. During her sentencing, she wept loudly, pleading for a lenient sentence by claiming she was merely a naive girl swept up in love. The judge silenced her by playing the recording where she coldly threatened to ruin my firm if I did not sign over a $20 million property. The court handed her a 12-year sentence in a minimum security correctional facility. The woman who banished me for lacking the proper aesthetic would spend the next decade wearing a standardized khaki uniform. Putting the criminals behind bars was merely the punitive phase of the operation. The restorative phase required the forensic dismantling of Julian financial architecture. I sat across from Marcus in his secure federal office, tracing the remaining capital hidden within Julian domestic shell companies. Through the legal framework of my private real estate trust, we partnered with the Securities and Exchange Commission Asset Recovery Division. We initiated immediate foreclosure protocols on the commercial leases Julian had fraudulently signed. We liquidated his leased luxury vehicles, his imported watches, and the lavish downtown penthouse he had rented to project his fake billionaire status. Every single dollar we clawed back from the wreckage was placed into a restitution fund. We prioritized the most vulnerable victims. The municipal workers, the retired teachers, and Chloe's own grandparents received their stolen pension funds back. They had attended the wedding, believing they were witnessing a financial prodigy, only to realize they were the unwilling financiers of the catering bill. Returning their life savings brought a quiet, resonant peace to my conscience. I used my anonymous holding company to ensure their accounts were replenished, verifying that the people who spent their lives working hard were not left destitute by a greedy predator. However, not everyone could be saved from their own toxic choices. Barbara and her husband had willingly mortgaged their ancestral estate to feed Julian Expansion Fund, believing their proximity to his fake wealth elevated their own social standing. When the federal authorities seized Julian fraudulent holding companies, the secondary mortgage they had signed went into immediate default. The bank did not care about their tragic family circumstances or their ruined public image. Barbara actually had the audacity to call my private cell phone 3 days after the arrests. She left a frantic, sobbing voicemail begging me to use my real estate connections to stop the bank from seizing her home. She asked for a loan, claiming we were practically family. I listened to the voicemail once, deleted it, and blocked her number. I owed no loyalty to a woman who had threatened me and enabled the theft of her own parents' retirement funds. The foreclosure process was swift and unforgiving. The sprawling multi-generational property was auctioned off to a commercial developer to satisfy the outstanding debt. Stripped of their home, their retirement funds, and their country club memberships, Chloe parents were exiled from the elite circles they had worshipped. The high society friends who had eagerly attended the rehearsal dinner now refused to return their calls, treating them as radioactive social pariahs. Destitute and humiliated, they were forced to relocate to a cramped, run-down apartment complex on the industrial edge of the city. They traded their curated garden parties for the harsh reality of living check to check, entirely dependent on fixed income assistance. They gambled their legacy on an illusion and lost everything they valued. I did not attend the sentencing hearings. I did not drive past Barbara's new low-income apartment to gloat. Lingering on the destruction of insignificant people is a poor use of valuable time. I returned my focus to the empire I had built. 2 months after the raid, I stood in my executive suite on the 40th floor of my Manhattan headquarters. The morning sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling glass windows, warming the dark mahogany of my desk. A fresh cup of black coffee rested near my keyboard. The city stretched out below me, a sprawling grid of concrete steel and endless opportunity. I took a slow, deliberate sip of the dark roast, savoring the quiet, tranquil atmosphere of my sanctuary. My lead acquisitions director walked into the office, placing a sleek leather folder onto the glass surface of my table. I opened the dossier, reviewing the finalized deeds. While Julian was trading his tailored suits for an inmate number, I had successfully negotiated the acquisition of 3 premium commercial retail blocks in the financial district. My real estate portfolio was expanding at an unprecedented rate, generating legitimate generational wealth that no internet rumor or petty social climber could ever touch. The silence in my office was not the fearful quiet of a woman hiding from public scrutiny. It was the calm, unyielding silence of an apex predator observing her territory. For years, society conditions women to play nice, to soften our edges, to conform to the aesthetic expectations of people who view our independence as a threat. Chloe demanded I shrink myself to fit into her superficial narrative. She expected me to swallow her insults and fund her vanity simply because we shared a history. She interpreted my restraint as compliance. She mistook my quiet, analytical nature for weakness. She failed to realize that true power rarely announces itself with loud tantrums or viral videos. True power observes. It gathers data. It builds structural leverage while the opposition is busy admiring their own reflection. When you encounter individuals who prioritize appearances over integrity, who attempt to weaponize your loyalty to cover their own deficiencies, you do not owe them your grace. You do not engage in screaming matches or public debates to defend your character. You quietly secure your assets, document their transgressions, and let their own boundless arrogance lead them directly to the slaughterhouse. Never apologize for the armor you wear to navigate this world. The very traits that make you an outcast in a room full of superficial opportunists are the exact tools required to dismantle their fraudulent kingdoms. Keep your head high, maintain your focus, and remember that enduring success is the only vengeance you will ever need. Have you ever had to outsmart a toxic friend who thought they held all the cards? Share your story in the comments below. Hit the like button and subscribe for more stories of surviving and thriving in a world that constantly underestimates quiet strength. Never let anyone dictate your worth, and always trust your own undeniable intuition. The view from the 40th floor remains unchanged, yet the air inside my office feels infinitely lighter today. Looking back at the wreckage, Julian and Chloe left behind, the contrast between their fabricated reality and my enduring empire offers a profound perspective. They traded their freedom for a temporary illusion of superiority. I traded my temporary discomfort for permanent security. If this grueling ordeal has taught me anything, the first undeniable truth is that silence represents the most lethal tool in your professional arsenal. Society conditions us to react, to defend ourselves loudly the moment our character is attacked. When Chloe launched her digital smear campaign, every instinct demanded an immediate public rebuttal to clear my name. But stepping into the mud only soils your own attire. Letting an adversary believe they have won forces them to drop their guard. They become careless. True control lies in watching your opponents build their own trap while you quietly hold the lock and the key. Let them talk while you secure the evidence. The second lesson is written in the cold, hard numbers of a commercial ledger. Financial independence serves as the ultimate armor against emotional manipulation. Julian operated on the assumption that wealth was merely a costume you could wear to intimidate people into blind compliance. He relied entirely on the ignorance of his victims to fund his Ponzi scheme. Understanding the intricate mechanics of your own capital removes the leverage toxic individuals try to wield against you. When you possess the ability to read the fine print, trace the offshore routing numbers, and secure your own assets, no predator can force you into a corner. Data does not lie, and it certainly does not care about wedding aesthetics. The third, and perhaps most vital realization, involves the dangerous myth of shared history. A decade of friendship or a lifetime of family ties does not grant anyone a free pass to exploit your trust. Chloe believed our past obligated me to fund her future and absorb her insults without consequence. Loyalty must be a reciprocal currency, not a blank check for abuse. Cutting ties with people who view you as a disposable resource rather than a human being is not an act of cruelty. It is a necessary surgical procedure to save your own life. You owe nothing to those who smile in your face while actively plotting your ruin. I close the laptop on my desk and finish my dark roast coffee. The city hums below, unaware of the silent wars fought and won within these glass towers. My foundation rests on unyielding truth, and I will never apologize for defending it. If you have ever walked away from a toxic relationship and built your own fortress out of the rubble, share your victory in the comments. Hit the like button and subscribe to Rabbit Revenge for more stories of surviving the ultimate betrayals and delivering the exact justice they deserve. Stay sharp, trust your instincts, and never let anyone dictate your worth.